Is the gig economy fundamentally broken? A lot of criticism has been laid at the feet of Uber and Airbnb. Are the excesses of the gig economy inherent to the system, or is it just those companies? If they were replaced by other organizations, would the gig economy be a more viable solution for workers and cities? All right, yeah. So I'm going to take a look at this. We haven't talked about the gig economy in like a long time, actually, which is surprising because there's one point we talked about it all the goddamn time. But yeah, uh, these different organizations, these companies, um, like at first, I think they've basically taken like the path of like a normal tech company, right? It pops up, it's making a lot of money, it's something new that maybe people hadn't quite seen before, and everyone fawns over it. Wall Street certainly loves them, and the media is like, well, this is gonna change the world, right? This is the future, um, and uh, like people jump onto whatever this new service is, but then eventually, and it differs for each company, eventually, like the cracks in their facade starts to show, and then we see how they take advantage of workers, or like they don't follow the ethos that they said they were following, um, and it just seems to, and this like tech paradise that people are constantly predicting falls apart. So I think this happened with the gig economy at large. Uh, Uber, Airbnb, and I guess Lyft as well, here in the states, are the biggest examples of this. Um, but so I want to figure out is it just that we have these organizations headed by like terrible human beings who don't really give a shit about their workers, or the impact they have on the cities that they operate in, or is it that the gig economy itself is flawed? So we'll do introductions and jump into it. So, Captain A. Jones, what do you think?
Yo, yo, yo. So yeah, I'm incredibly split on the gig economy. Like I definitely understand the the people who criticize Uber and Lyft and Airbnb especially, because these are like the big players in the game, and I think that they're the kind of face of the problem. But I think like underneath that there is an entire network of a kind of like a natural gig economy that may not necessarily be through apps and stuff like that, but it's exactly the same thing. I mean, ultimately, it pays the exact same way. You get treated the exact same way. You have no fucking benefits, and you are, you have to just take whatever fucking work comes your way. So, like, I think that it's. I, I don't want to just only blame, the gig economy, and I kind of want to get a little more nuanced about it because I think that there's it's not so black and white.
Okay, uh, sneaky debate, man.
Yeah, so I think I'm more or less with Captain Jones here. I did some reading into it earlier because I wasn't really too up to date on this topic. So I read a few studies and a few like opinion pieces and stuff like that on it. And honestly, it doesn't seem like it's too bad. So we get very much into this like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb. They're all really bad. They treat their workers really poorly. And like yeah, that does seem to be the face of the problem. But also, these companies only make up about a third of the gig economy. The other two-thirds of the gig economy has been functioning actually quite well for quite a long time. Um, and and in contrast to the rest of the economy, the gig economy is incredibly efficient. Like Uber is incredibly efficient. Like Lyft is incredibly efficient. Like they never spend a penny more than they have to, and that's why they can compete, and that's why they can have these price gouges, and that's why they can engage in like predatory market practices, which is the crux of the issue. This is where we see the problems with these things. Um, but in a lot of cases, the gig economy functions fine as long as you have like reasonable competition. From the studies I read, it doesn't seem to impact um, what they call dependent workers, i.e., workers that like work for a company and they work dependent on that company rather than being contracted. It does tend to put downward pressure on wages, which is obviously bad, and like the monopsony of labor, the labor market through like predatory marketing practice does tend to put downward pressure on wages, which is obviously a bad thing again. Um, And then we get all into this like, oh, what about the benefits of the worker and the rights of the worker and stuff like that? But it tends to be that they don't really differ too much from that and just like normal self-employment. But the only difference is, think companies like Uber and Airbnb and stuff like that can essentially trap you in. So, like I said, they have incredibly predatory marketing practices, and because they're so large and so efficient, they can crunch down prices, which means that other people who are self-employed can't compete. And as a result, they actually end up having to join these things, whether it be Uber or Handy or whatever, right? Like I said, the gig economy extends beyond public transport, personal transport, whatever you want to call it. And they end up having to join. And because that was their income beforehand, and that's what they're trained for, they become dependent on the company now, which means the company now has a say in what hours they get, what jobs they can work, how they have to work, right? The restrictions on that. And it takes away a lot of autonomy away from the worker, which is contrast to the argument you always hear, oh, it gives autonomy to the worker. Actually, to the person who was self-employed beforehand, they lose a lot of autonomy when these companies come into town. So overall, that is not necessarily a bad thing, the gig economy. There are quite clear and obvious benefits to me. But the issue seems to be that there's some very sort of like loose legislation around this, and we probably need to have some like worker protections in place to make sure, and customer protections in place to make sure that everybody gets a fair deal out of this.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Wordy.
Yeah, so obviously, you can go with the argument, fuck capitalism, but just for specifically within, no, I'm just saying not, yeah, you can say that. I'm just saying within this, like, that doesn't really matter here. So there's generally this kind of trend that's been occurring is you look at like, a lot of teachers assistants in universities are dealing with this issue where they're doing a lot of work, but they're not necessarily being considering like full professors or anything. It kind of like prevents them from a lot of benefits. A lot of people are doing multiple job times. And so like a common thing is like if you're not working full time, you may be denied benefits and denied like the same kind of access full time workers would be. And I think the gig economy is kind of like this exacerbation, like this kind of more extreme process itself. Like gig economy, it's considers like 20% of the total. So it's not like all of it, but it is taking a growing number of people as it's like increasing more and more. And from there, it's also like just generally looked at the data as like if an accident or something was happening, like if it cost like $1,000 or more, a lot of people wouldn't be able to like kind of afford it in that process. So it seems to be generally the trend is kind of like the stability of a job, the inconsistency, maybe sometimes like if you're doing like Uber or something, right? You get paid this much on this day, but this much on that day. And it's a really inconsistent set of wages. So really more than anything, considering it's listed as like an independent contractor and like a 1099, the real relationship that comes is basically how much they are considered under an employee, with kind of tax exemptions, and kind of how the process works for them is a lot differently than full-time employees. So that relationship itself kind of makes it harder for them to kind of advocate for more payment, to kind of makes them maybe a little less scrupulous under the company itself. So ultimately the problem that comes is how do we address that? Like I would agree with like more legislation to kind of like having businesses to have a more fair treatment of them and kind of like improve the conditions, because ultimately it's that whole relationship. And my concern would be is these processes that are not just not just the gig economy, but just generally these kind of like less than full time or less kind of a full employment that makes it harder for these people. And it's kind of like incentive where you're like, oh, I can make some quick money and make it consistent, but there's not a guarantee.
Okay, let's go to Pyro.
I agree with Captain Jones and Sneaky Debate, man, and a little bit of Wordy a lot on a lot of this. I think like when we look at gig economies, we need to realize that it's not just one set of things. Like you have when I'm doing the research on this, like there's two specific groups that they like to mention. Contingent gig workers who like are your Uber drivers. They get hired to a company based on a desire that people want, and that company provides the service, but like they're like the independent contractors. And then you have like your freelance people. Right now, since this is mainly talking about Uber and Airbnb, like I want to focus on like contingent workers, and like there are some legal protections I can see being put in place. So like these workers have at least some type of protection under the law. How far we go with them, I think like we'll debate that a little bit on this panel. But like yeah, I think overall like there should be some things that we do to protect people who get their money from Uber Eats or Uber or Lyft and stuff like that.
TheTerk.
Yeah, so I actually agree with some of the statements. Again, Captain Sneaky Tyrant said, I'm a full-blooded capitalist. If money, give it to me. I work with a lot of contractors, and I'm really curious on what scale of the gig economy we want to talk about, right? Because we work with a bunch of contractors. I work at a big tech company, and they get paid handsomely because they have a skill and there's not a lot of people there. So supply and demand kind of goes counter to some of the other arguments that were said here. So uh, I'm really curious which realm of this debate we're going to go and talk about. And then when it comes to protecting these workers, the workers do have a say in what work they do. They don't necessarily have to work for the companies or with the organizations that don't provide them the benefits they want. So I think you're kind of trying to eat your cake too in some of these debates. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say.
They sort of do have to work with these large companies. So like I said, when Uber comes into town, and because it's like very, very efficient and it has a lot of like labor to draw from, they can afford to set very low prices. Like it's not with Uber specifically, just in general with like these platforms they're called. In general with these platforms, they can afford to set very low prices, and they can afford to like do this because they're so efficient.
Right.
So
but
if you're like a contractor and you're not working with them, nobody's going to go with you because they know they can get it cheaper elsewhere, right? So yes, you can choose not to accept the work, but overall, what ends up happening in a majority sense is that these self-employed people would then have to go and join that company in order not to be competing, because competing means like death essentially.
But they do have the option of also choosing a different line of work. Working for Uber and Lyft is not necessarily a high skilled job.
Yeah. This is
There's other
this
realms that a worker can go and try and get more
yeah,
secure
but
and stable work.
so like I said, like Uber and Lyft and like this is only like 1/3 of the gig economy, and globally the gig economy only takes up about 3% of the economy. So it's like
Is
a
it
percent of a
3%?
percent.
And it's like 20% in America.
Yeah, maybe 20% in America. I read 3% globally. So although like in the case of like Uber and Lyft, like it is a bit easier to like retrain. But a lot of the time these people are like foreign workers, and they struggle to find employment elsewhere. In the cases of other things, like the other 2/3 of the gig economy, say for example, like I don't know, you're a handyman, you're a carpenter or something like that. Retraining is not really an option. And even if you were to retrain, it would take a lot of time and a lot of money to do so. So retraining is just not really an option. So what you're forced to do is join the conglomerate so you don't get priced out, which means that you do lose autonomy over the work that you can accept and you can't accept because you're now beholden to the rules of this company.
I think you would also have to consider like basically what people are driven to. So basically, like a lot of workers don't have a lot of like financial security and stability. So if you don't have that stability, you're kind of like coercively driven towards that job itself if it's accessible. It like when we talk about you having the option just to choose another job, you don't necessarily consider like the extenuating circumstances you're driven towards that behavior in the first place. So like basically is people they have an autonomy, but whenever you are kind of driven to that by the need to make money to survive, then you don't really have a choice in that aspect. And so like that's a portion that sometimes people forget.
Yeah, I think that's a decent like point to pivot off of. Like, who is benefiting the most from the gig economy? It's definitely not the people who are signing up to be Uber and Lyft drivers. Not the majority of them, at least.
Well, no, but
Uh,
conversely, the purchasers of this labor are to benefit, like because like I said, like they're very efficient. I'm going to keep saying this like a million times, because they're so fucking efficient, the prices go low, and it means the consumer is to benefit from this, and thus,
Yeah.
if the consumer benefits, right, the consumer wants more of it, and thus the platform continues in this kind of behavior.
Whoa! You're stealing my thunder.
Sorry, go ahead,
go ahead.
Debate, man. I was about to make that point. Hold on.
Go ahead.
I would say is sorry.
No. You're fine.
Okay, I would
was
say
just kidding around.
Yeah, there does come a problem though. Like this is a little bit anecdotal, but like in terms of like Uber and Lyft and stuff, it's like if you're going through that process, it depends on the time frames. Like if you have big games, like football games or something, that makes the variability in price a little problematic sometimes for the consumer. So I would say is like as a whole, it may be beneficial for the consumer, but like in short term like fluctuations, that may cause some issue in itself. So like it depends kind of like on like an average trend, it may be beneficial, but we do have to sometimes consider that short term process.
I guess, but it seems to be, at least from what I read, like consumers are happy to pay like the surge charges and stuff like that because they understand there's not many people around. It's going to cost more if there are no people around. People like tend to be familiar and like accepting of this supply and demand thing. And like I said again, the service you get does actually tend to be better. I read that when waiting for like a regular taxi, I think it was like only 39% of people waited 10 minutes or less, whereas with Uber or like one of these other services, it was like 89% of people. So like almost double, more than double the amount of people waited like less time. So like again, like the efficiency there is really driving customers towards it. Like they know that they can really do that, and they seem to be happy to pay extra to do so.
So
I would
maybe
argue that like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and all these different gig economy sites are like almost, I would say, squarely beneficial for the consumer in like in like the, just when you think about it without like going into, oh well, this factor and this factor make their housing prices go down or some shit like that, whatever. Like it's good for the consumer. And so like when we talk about these issues, what we are really complaining about is like the little guy getting fucked over because, and let's face it, like I've been using DoorDash like the entire pandemic to get my groceries and stuff like that. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm paying somebody $7-8 to go out there and risk fucking getting COVID so that I don't have to interact with as many people. And that,
He does. He doesn't
I
want.
and
mean,
that saves my life.
He
right?
doesn't want to
Like,
interact with the plebs, right?
Exactly.
Back behind the moat.
Exactly.
I
So like I don't know. That just seems. But when you put it like that, all of a sudden, I just said that I was paying somebody $7-8 to go risk their fucking life to get my groceries. Like that seems really fucked up.
So
I mean,
so,
like
have
Captain
you
Jones
thought-
hits on a really good point, right? Like a lot of these things, a lot of these services we're talking about, like they're there because people want them. If I have the option to not go the fuck outside and down the street to go get Subway, I'll choose that option, and I'm willing to pay a little bit more. For me, it's exactly what like Captain Jones said in Sneaky Debate Man we're hitting at. I'm worried about like the little man, like the person doing the delivering. I want to make sure that like if you're doing 3 hours worth of Ubering or 3 hours worth of Uber Eats, you get compensated rightly. So like for me, one of the solutions I would propose is like these companies, y'all give fucking minimum wage. Like if these people are working, 3 hours a day or something, you do the fucking math and you give them like in New York State, you give them New York State's minimum wage.
That's
So, like,
difficult though,
can I-
because that
can I
means you then
provide an
have
alternative?
to. Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Yeah. So Captain Jones, you said that you use these services a lot because you didn't want to go outside, and these people are risking their lives to, get you your groceries and stuff. Do you tip them as well on top of the
Oh, of course.
surcharges and
Yeah,
stuff?
of course.
You do? Okay,
Unless
cool.
they don't walk up the stairs. I'm just
Yeah, but
kidding. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. It's a joke.
But tipping in America just like is so small in it, like amount of like actual compensation for like how much people are working and how much they kind
But no,
of
that
deserve to be paid.
goes to my point. We need to start treating these workers as consumers better instead of the companies, because the companies are providing the platform for these contractors to go and do a job. They are serving us. We should be paying them commensurate to what kind of service they provide.
But that's a dumb argument to make, because the problem comes is like whenever these companies are like the ones who are making the primary amount of profit and they're basically taking the least amount of cost in this relationship, then basically they're the ones who are doing this entire thing. We're like the consumers. We're the end result here.
Yeah,
you have to basically
paying
think
the driver.
Yes. Yeah, we're paying the driver, but the frustration comes is why should the consumer be responsible for fairly compensating when the company is the one who is doing this entire relationship and they're purposely driving down wages in the first place?
Because each person that delivers something can earn additional wage based on the service they give, and that should be a good drive for both the consumer to be more generous towards the driver, and it also drives the driver to be a better service member, and it benefits both parties. And,
I
and,
feel
and,
like-
the, and the platform doesn't earn any additional money out of that.
I
Yeah, I'm not-
I disagree. I disagree with this argument because, like, if we look at like European countries, the whole relationship of tipping culture doesn't really have to exist because there are fair worker protections. There's more fair compensation. So, like, this whole placing the burden on the responsibility of the consumer when you basically fail to like analyze how the company is failing to meet its like the needs of the worker here, of like not really paying attention to them. You're basically like kind of ignoring this larger, more influential series of mechanisms as opposed to just the consumers or just like
Anybody
I mean,
else?
Yeah.
it does seem odd that you'd want the value of labor to be determined by the individuals who you interact with rather than the markets from a capitalist perspective. That doesn't really seem fitting to your ideology in general. And like more issues to that are that tipping is notoriously unreliable, right? Like how you feel I was going to get into this about like rating systems and stuff like that. They're notoriously unreliable. Like, can any of you describe what a 3-star Uber ride feels like? What is a 3-star Uber ride? Nobody fucking know.
when
What?
I'm-
I don't know
Yeah,
what
When
a
I
3
get
star
when
Uber
I'm
ride
being
is.
driven
listen,
by
no.
fuck.
when I'm being driven by a foreigner from Europe, that's what a 3-star.
No, listen, like anything above a 2-star is simply I got to my destination in one
Exactly.
piece.
I got out of the car and I thought, yes, very 3-star that Uber ride. And like,
I got
it's
there.
notoriously unreliable. Like, people don't rate things 3 stars, right? It depends on how you feel that day. It depends on whether you fucking like the dude in the car. And like, you know, obviously you're not gonna like everyone. It depends. Like, what your 5-star might be 1 star to somebody else, right? And you only tend to get extreme ratings because you either go, yes, I enjoyed that, or no, I didn't enjoy that. Nobody gives a 3-star Uber rating, which makes it incredibly unreliable. And it's the same with this like tipping culture. Right, tips often rely on like the generosity of the individual at the door.
Like
Right?
I just
And,
want
like,
to
I need to
input.
be more
notoriously
generous.
unreliable. Like what is like more generous though? Right? What if I already tip 20% on every bill? Do I need to be more generous? Like, do I need to be less generous? Like, generosity is like this like nebulous concept that we can't really rely on.
Why does the
for
company
worker
need to
protections.
not be more generous? They're the ones making
like
a significant amount of revenue here.
I'm not saying that
Like,
they
basically-
shouldn't. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but I also think that as a consumer, we have a piece of this equation as well. And that if someone's providing a service to me that I can't go and do myself, I should tip, and I should tip as generous as I
That's
can.
that's like besides the point of them like actually doing like the companies themselves not paying Uber drivers enough money, right? Like when I see complaints from Uber drivers, one of the biggest things is like, yo, we don't make that much money from just the ride itself. A lot of it comes down to tips. So like when you don't tip or you only tip like $1 or $2, that's pretty shitty, especially if I drove you halfway across the fucking city, right? Like, so that's why I said like you have the companies raise their wages a little bit or like have them on a base amount. So like you can at least say like, hey, you chose this occupation, you knew it was going to be this amount of pay. It's not down to me to tip. Tipping culture in America is optional. And this is like gig economy work. This isn't like, yo, I'm a service worker in like some fucking bar somewhere where like that's expected and like you're there in person. Like
Okay,
usually
but
these tips
service
are
work
given
also
after.
sucks too for tipping.
No, it does. No, it really does, right? But like when it comes to like these gig economies and these delivery services, a lot of the mistipping and like just the low tips come from the fact that I can do that after you've already walked the fuck away.
So that was
Like,
actually what Wordy just said. Like, as a service worker, and I also worked plenty of service jobs. Like, I know what it is to make money off tips. Like, that's what I was kind of getting at in my opening statement. Like, there is an underlying problem with the way that we treat certain workers. Like, I was I was paid under the table in one job, but like in the other jobs, if I wasn't paid under the table, they were gonna make sure that I didn't get the hours, so that it made so that they didn't have to give me any health care or whatever. So like and then oh my god, one place the fucking manager was stealing part of the tips. Like it's there's just so many. I don't know. I guess the point that I'm trying to get at is like there is this other segment of the economy that's treated exactly like the gig economy, not necessarily service workers, but people like construction workers. I did construction for a long time as well. like landscaping. These are like essentially gig economy workers. They get paid on the same. They have to pay the same type of taxes, 1099. You know, and that is like fucking horrible. You actually have to pay taxes at the end of the year unless you're really savvy, which most people aren't. You know, and so is that like Uber and Lyft and all these companies' fault for taking advantage of that? Like, absolutely not. Like, somebody was going to come in and try to do that and take a bunch of capital and fucking do the Amazon route, and just spend a shitload of money to get market penetration, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that was definitely going to happen.
It
But
just
like, there's a way more amount of workers who aren't with them who are getting treated like shit as well. Like, I got hurt on the job plenty of times and there was no recompense for me. Like
it just seems really odd that you'd think that like worker protections should be based on the generosity of the individual rather than like just having good worker protections, right? Like surely it should be in everybody's interest that our workers have like good protections, right? I don't understand why you'd want that to just be like based on the generosity of the individual you were interacting with on that day. Like it just seems like
Well, what if I'm in a
really
pissy fucking mood? Like, what if
exactly
everything goes wrong that day and
exactly
I'm like,
it,
you
it
know
just it
what?
just feels
Fuck
like really
you. I'm not giving you
unreliable.
my money.
Exactly. It
Like,
just feels like really unreliable and dangerous. And like what you'd end up doing is get like one guy who just unfortunately interacts with like a bunch of people in a bad mood and then can't pay his rent through no fault of his
like,
own. Like,
unfortunately, I've worked service industry and stuff where like tips are a big thing. I don't expect tips. I expect people to be pretty selfish. They're coming in expecting me to do my job properly. If they give a tip, that's generous. That's generosity out of them. I don't expect that. What I expect to is like get a base wage from my job, like some type of, consistent income, especially if the company I'm working for is like explicitly making their business off of that, like Uber is. Their business is basically a cab service. Like, give your employees some base pay.
So you feel like if you're doing a job, you should get paid a certain amount, regardless of how well or how happy you are in doing that job.
Mm,
I think if you're doing the job, then yes, there should be like a minimum rate you should get paid for
yeah.
doing that job, right? If you
And
do the job
Uber
really badly,
provides that minimum rate.
yeah, no, I think that's probably a good thing. But the issue with this is like then you get like people cheating the system, right? So like,
Wait,
when
didn't they just recently implement that? Like, was
they,
it
they
like
did, yeah,
Yeah.
when
they
was
did,
that
but like
implemented?
not too long ago. But it's like the problem with this is now that Uber has implemented like a minimum wage, that means they now get to ask a minimum out of you, which means you now have to comply to their rules, which takes away all the benefits of being like this like contract worker because now you're effectively formally employed, right? You have like a wage that you're going to get regardless, and you have to be there for like a certain amount of time. So like it just you just end up being a dependent
A
worker at that
cab
point.
service. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
and
You just end up being a dependent worker, which is
that's
like
the
the point.
struggle with this. Like,
That's what I mean.
especially
Like
with Uber. Like,
you like when you employ like a minimum wage and stuff like that, what you do is you eliminate the benefits of the gig economy effectively, right? And like what you do is you cut off the efficiency that the gig economy can apply because like what they're doing, the reason they're so efficient is because they can always match labor to supply, right? They can always match demand to supply because they're not paying people they're not using. That's why they're so efficient, right? Whereas if you have these people that now you have to pay regardless, then you become incredibly inefficient because sometimes there'll be very low supply, but you still have to pay these people because they're they're doing the thing, which in turn causes an economic downturn, right? Which in turn crashes the company. So it's not necessarily a good thing just giving them all minimum wage. Like what we need to do is make it so that people don't get trapped in this bottom like era. So like what I read was like 20% of them are dependent on the gig economy. They're dependent on their provider or the platform, sorry. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about Uber or Lyft. I'm just talking about gig economy platforms in general. And there are fucking loads of them. We just talk about Uber and Lyft a whole bunch.
I mean, like Twitch is a gig platform economy. In a sense.
Exactly right. So what happens is you get trapped in the bottom 20%. So what happens is if that platform will come in, they'll price gouge the area. So you're forced to join them. And now, because you can't retrain or you don't have any other employment opportunities, you're now dependent on that place. However, you're essentially a dependent worker now. However, you don't get any protections from them, and they don't give you any like benefits or anything like that. Thirdly, they have no incentive to train you or progress you in that because you're just a pleb worker, right? You don't actually work for them. They don't own your labor. So like it's against innovation. It's against worker protections, and it's like specifically making it so like services are worse.
There's also the problem with like long-term problems is like when you talk about like you're getting charged for like the different taxes, you aren't getting charged those, and basically it's like if you don't either remember or if you don't automatically have them charged, if you don't know how to the process of like filing your taxes, then basically like all these benefits that come with like later in life like social security and such, then basically it makes it harder to be able to access those things. Like
Oh yeah.
long time ago, like there's this dude who was paid under the table and he would get paid under the table and he wouldn't be paid. And so he basically has to work for the rest of his life. He's like 70 something years old because like he was paid under the table. And the problem comes in the relationship is there's almost this incentive to kind of like drive this gig economy a little bit, because if you're having to have less full-time workers, you're having less benefits having to pay out, you're having to less go through like this systematic process, then basically it makes the stability of workers in the long term kind of
Yeah.
worse,
And
but
this,
it makes your profits better off.
and this is also like another issue with this, right? So another issue with this with like the social benefits, right? So a lot of these workers, they don't make enough to get charged tax, right? However, in countries where we have like, for example, universal healthcare and stuff like that, they're not contributing to that. However, they still receive the same benefits because they're not technically employed workers. So they don't make the threshold to pay like VAT and stuff like that, and pay for I don't know, Social Security, whatever the fuck you Americans call it. It's national insurance here. They don't make enough to pay for that, right? So they're below the line because they're an independent contractor. Uber pays it, obviously, because they make fucking loads of money, but the individual doesn't. So the individual is not contributing to the system, but they are reaping all the benefits out of the system, which again is is bad. That puts a strain on the system when you've got like a large amount of people doing this. So like again, what we do need is these people making enough, which means that we can't have this bottom 20% trapped there. Like that we need laws in place that stop, basically antitrust laws that stop them price gouging, which stop them having a monopoly on the labor market, because that's when it leads to bad outcomes. The gig economy in general is not like a bad thing. Having like competition is like really necessary. And what happens is they buy up all the labor and they price everyone out, and then they eliminate the competition. When they eliminate the competition, that's when things get really nasty. That's when we get like big problems with the gig economy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's like from a standpoint of like if as we're talking gig economy, like that's the problem with Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all of these companies. That is that they've come in with like large amounts of investor money and done the Amazon model where they just fucking like what Lyft and Uber both did, was just give their drivers way more money than what the market would have given them otherwise. So they're just essentially just fucking they're going to price out everybody else in the in the short term or whatever, so that they can get rid of the competition
But
and then create a monopoly on it.
it tends to be that like established firms actually don't have that much of a problem competing with Uber, and they tend to like survive quite well. From what I read actually, because like generally speaking, the people in that area build up like trust in local services, and they're like, oh yeah, we got our local taxi service, we always use that, we can trust them. With Uber, you don't know what you're gonna get, and people are a little bit racist, and like, I don't want to be driven around by like a Lithuanian or whatever, and they're a bit racist, so they tend to stick with their local taxi services.
Okay, but
so-
in terms
so,
of
like-
established, sorry.
So
Sorry,
they
if you
tend to
want
be
to-
all right. It's like the self-employed people specifically, like the guy who's got like his own taxi license and drives his own cab. He's the one getting fucked, not the taxi company with like a fleet of taxis that isn't Uber but has like employed taxi drivers. It's the self-employed person who's getting fucked, not the other taxi company.
But you could basically kind of like chalk this up to like a natural like progression, right? If you're supposedly in a market, you're basically the whole goal is to kind of like dominate the market. So you're going to naturally try to drive out as many competitors as possible. So basically, you're like, okay, we got to increase the wages, and they're like the firms left over. You're like, okay, you have two options here. We can either agree to not fight each other, or we can say fuck you and then just see what happens. And so that's kind of the whole relationship that exists. It's like this gig economy, I think, is just kind of like a reflection of a natural broader problem in kind of how our economy works. Is like there's not really a free market. It's kind of like these larger firms trying to drive out every other competitor and be able to dominate the market to where you can have either a monopoly or like an oligopoly, and just see kind of how the relationship exists. The gig economy, I would assert, is kind of just a natural extreme reflection of that natural progressive trend as a whole.
So
Yeah.
I got a question. So let's say Congress passes this law that says Uber, Lyft, all of these types of companies have to provide a minimum wage of X amount of dollars in order to, employ a person to do the delivery service. As a consumer of these services, would you be willing to pay triple the current service fee for your deliveries and your trips in order to better accommodate, these people's jobs? Because you all know that the companies aren't just going to take it on the chin, right? They're going to pass the costs down. So, as
Oh,
consumers, are you willing to pay
Well,
that?
I'll
that
answer
actually,
full on. I'll answer full on with that. Yeah, right. Because like if I'm being charged a flat rate to get where I need to go, for me, and like living in a large city,
No,
and I know
it's
that's like
it's
very
it's
high.
service fee plus all the other stuff that's going on. They're
but
basically bumping up the cost of the trip because they have to pay the
No,
base level
I
price.
it
understand what
doesn't
you're
it doesn't have
saying,
to
right?
function like that though. It doesn't have to function like that. So like,
But that's the
what
way I
how
phrased the question.
I know, but like this isn't how it would play out in reality. So like basically what we need to do is make it so there are like dependent workers and like firms that can compete, firms with dependent workers, fucking hell. Firms with dependent workers that can compete with like these like gig platforms, right? And if those firms of dependent workers can compete with the gig platforms, that keeps them in check, stops people falling into dependency on these things.
So, like
And
a
it also,
union of drivers would negotiate with
well,
Uber
no,
or
not a union.
whatever.
You actually, funnily enough, right? The Uber drivers can't unionize against
I
Uber
said
because they're
like,
so.
so similar.
Yeah, but like they can't collectively bargain against Uber because if they do, it would technically be considered a cartel, which is illegal. They're not actually allowed to do
Wait,
that,
it's considered a cartel?
that is considered a cartel. Yeah, I read this
The
earlier.
Uber cartel.
Yeah, it's technically considered a cartel, and they're not allowed to do that because they're self-employed. You're only allowed to unionize when you're like formally employed. Otherwise, that's a cartel. You know, like that.
That's
So as long
kinda
as you,
fun.
yeah, so as long as you have a like a competition there that keeps the price down, right? Because like you don't want to be like, yes, we charge 3 times as much as our competitors, because obviously the competitors, everybody's going to go to the competitors there and you get destroyed. So as long as there's like a healthy competition there, it tends to just even out the balance, and that price doesn't get handed down, and the company just sort of like has to suck on it.
But
Yeah,
that doesn't
so
go with what I proposed.
so Turk, I'll play along. I'll play along with you.
Well, no,
Turk.
like I was
I
like,
think
hold on,
Go
Captain Jake,
ahead,
like
Pyro.
yeah, like to answer your question, like I was like, yeah, I would be willing to pay that flat rate versus getting in a cab in like the city I live in and watching the meter tick up and up, knowing that like they may not take the most direct path. Meanwhile, with Uber, most Ubers, not all of them, most Ubers, they have like the phone right there so you can watch the GPS and you have the GPS on your phone. I like the idea of a flat rate for my trip versus watching the meter tick based on like if traffic is running or like if they decide to take another route that's just longer for some reason. Like I would pay that personally, especially if it's lower than the cab rates in my city. If it turns out the cab rates in my city are lower, I'll go with what's lower. And I think that's what Sneaky Debate Man was trying to say when he was talking about like competition being like something that's important to have in the economy and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
but basically the prices won't spiral as long as you keep the competition in favor. And like again, like if they decide to pass the cost down to the worker's then not going to work for them anymore. He's going to work for one of these other firms and become a dependent worker, right? Like it's just what's going to happen. So like the price can't spiral like that with that company surviving.
Yeah, I think what you would end up seeing is just a less amount of workers because they wouldn't be hiring as many, since they would have to hire them as like a, and not 1099. So like this is just yeah, like that's what it would lead to. It would lead to people not using the service as much. The service would have to, I mean, you would have to probably wait longer, etc.
And
for
then
your
these
Uber.
workers would also complain that the minimum wage for the base rate that they now negotiated and actually had laws passed in order to do that, they're no longer happy with that. So it's
I don't
again
want them to have
another
a minimum
cycle.
wage. I don't want them to have a minimum
wait.
wage. I don't want gig workers to have a minimum wage. Like,
Minimum wage, not like the minimum wage. But
Okay,
like
yeah, but
but
I don't want them
base-
to.
wait,
I don't want them to
Turk,
have that though.
Turk,
I don't want them to
there's-
have that.
Turk, there's a problem though, is like naturally as like the economy progresses, things change, things react, and you're like, okay, well, if like the economy is at this level right now, you're like, okay, the amount of work I'm performing relative to how much like the economy would value me, I'm like, hey, I probably like deserve some more money, right? That's the whole relationship between like labor and capital here, right? The workers are like, okay, I'm being paid this much, and I feel like this is low unfair, and then the businesses are like, well, I don't want to pay you that much, and so that's that kind of a negotiating relationship. It's a natural friction that exists, and it basically has to be negotiated. So like that's
And the
just how it
friction
occurs.
goes back to the consumer, because as wages increase, service cost increases, the cost of doing the business increases, thus your service you're paying for also increases. And that goes back to
But
my original question I stated.
I'm
Are
pretty
you
sure.
are you willing to pay
no, yep.
3 times
Yeah,
the
yeah.
base service fee on top of your mileage fee and all this other stuff in order for your Uber drivers to get a base pay rate?
But
I'm pretty sure like having more minimum wage kind of like inputs more into the economy, has like a more healthy functioning economy. So like I'm pretty sure like
yes,
things.
you are
So wait,
willing to
yes,
pay
I'm
triple.
fine with that. Yes, I'm fine with it increasing. I'm not sure it's going to be triple. I feel like that's a little bit of an extreme claim. But as a whole, I'm fine with it increasing, because like naturally things are going to increase because like due to either inflation or whatever the metric,
Yeah.
like things just naturally increase over time. That's just kind of how the economy works. Things increase, costs increase, life increase, and from there, as like minimum wage, I think has a net positive effect on the economy, because like more these people who are getting higher wages are going to input it more into the economy. It makes everything kind of just increase around it.
Yeah,
I think the
that
better
is-
contribution to the economy is for these workers to learn additional skills and go into higher paying jobs instead of being stuck in these, gig economy roles.
yeah,
Okay,
we
but
need
the
these
problem,
people.
yeah, but the
We
problem
need
comes
taxi
is,
drivers.
but the problem comes is like one, yeah, we need those jobs, but two is like having better wages. If they want to transition to different jobs later, it makes them more financially secure, so they're more easily able to transition to higher skilled jobs. Like, okay, well, I'm being paid this amount of money. I don't have to like work my butt like 80 hours a week anymore. So like that whole relationship, right? Having these basic protections, having this baseline level as a whole does a lot of good things for the workers, does it for the company, and it does it for the consumer as a whole. Like that's just kind of like the natural progression. Like the frustration for me a little bit here, Turk, is kind of like this on this one very specific variable instead of kind of like just looking at all of the variables. Yes, prices increase, congratulations, but like all these other things are improving because of these basic protections.
yeah, and like ultimately, we really need contract labor. Like contract labor is super efficient for the economy. All that Google, or I think Google, Lyft and Uber are doing is connecting a driver with a passenger and having a contract. It's going to cost you $41 to get from here to here. And if you want to give a tip, whatever, give a tip on top. But this is just, and that's why, like, I would also push back against necessarily, even though I voted for what is it, Prop 22 or whatever it was in California, which came up for the gig economy, to vote for more protections, and I believe it was a minimum wage for gig economy workers. But with that said, I actually don't think like that's necessarily the best option.
So like when I talk about like a minimum wage or a base wage for like gig workers, I don't mean all people in the gig economy, right? I mean people who work like contingent, are like in contingent workplaces. So like Uber, they made that company simply to capitalize on the fact that yes, people do require cabs and rides to places. And then they hired a bunch of privately owned contractors, as they put it, or like self contractors, as they put it, to go out and like do that for them. They rake in the majority of the profits. They're operating at a loss, and like that is something that must be said. But like they are they are keeping most of that money. I think that like in a fairer system, yeah, they should pay a base fucking wage if they're like a contingent business that like operates on that model. Independent gig workers like streamers and such, I don't necessarily feel that way, because like we literally, like as streamers, we negotiate everything within ourselves. Like,
Like
the wages we take and whatnot and all that shit.
Wait. The problem
Ooh.
comes with streamers is that like there's almost a guaranteed amount of money like they're going to take away. Like it's like, if I'm wrong, I might be wrong. I'm stupid, but like it's like 50% they take like away from how much you draw in as a streamer.
That depends on how much where you gain your donations
Are
from. There are
streamers really a part of the gig economy?
They're
Am I
independent
missing
gig
something?
workers. They're
Technically, right.
independent gig. They're independent gig workers.
The thing is, right, so you don't need to provide like literally like pay a minimum wage. What you need to do is provide that person with enough money to live, right? Like there's slightly different concepts, but functionally they're very similar. So
It's like a
instead of
minimum wage, right?
so instead of like being like, right, if you clock into Uber and you spend this much time here, you get paid a minimum
It's like
wage.
the minimum amount of
Spoon.
money to get
Spoon.
earned.
I was just
Oh.
like, minimum
Like
wage.
sneaky,
it's okay.
yeah, like
Let me
Call
it's
it
address it.
minimum wage.
Let me
Okay.
Like
no,
like it's a minimum
it's not.
wage.
That's not what I'm going
It's
to
a
say.
minimum
That's not what
wage.
I'm going
I'm
to. That's not what I'm
interested
going to
in
say.
hearing
basic
how it's
income?
different
That's
in
not
like
what I'm
based
going to
on
say.
gonna
hours,
tell you.
That's not what
but
I'm
it's
going
a
to say.
minimum
He's-
wage.
A
he's-
minimum.
He's going to tell
That's
you.
not what I'm
Go
gonna
ahead,
say.
Spoon.
Right. So instead of having like, yes, you clock in, you get paid, this much, the minimum wage, right? What it is like, for example, saying that like Uber, you can't take more than X% of this journey, or you can't offer rides that don't pay at least this much to your workers, right? For example, like things like that. So instead of paying specifically a minimum wage, what you do is make it so that the business itself has to make sure that the workers get profitable jobs, right? Because you've seen like the horror stories, right, of like Uber drivers taking jobs and owing Uber money at the end of it, right? And like they reverse charged themselves, right? It's not good at all. So
So
like what they need is
you would like Uber to implement like something where like they have to pay a certain amount or like a minimum amount to their workers.
no, they don't have to pay a
Or-
minimum amount to their
or-
workers. It means
or-
that,
A minimum
A
wage, right?
minimum
Like
wage.
no, it's
like
not.
a
Okay.
minimum.
He's
A
not-
minimum.
No,
They're not
no,
allowed
you're
to
missing.
take
No, you're
out.
missing
It's
the
not the
point.
same thing.
You're
Huh?
missing the point. You're missing the point, right? So like in one scenario, you clock in, right? Uber pays you when you clock in, right? You get paid a minimum wage, right? And because you get paid a minimum wage for clocking in, Uber now has control over you. They say you have to adhere to our restrictions to get paid because you're now on the clock, right? Like any workplace does, right? You're no longer a gig worker at this point. You're now a dependent worker, all right? It's not in the gig economy, right? Whereas in my scenario, you may only take one job in an hour, right? And that job in that hour may result in you getting paid less than the minimum wage, right? But you've chosen to take that one job, right? And that one job is equitable to you in terms of how the cash received from that job is distributed, right? So it's not that you get paid a minimum wage specifically and you are on the clock and you have to adhere to their restrictions. It's that the job that you get paid for is equitable.
Okay, memes aside. Sorry, if you want to go Turk.
Yeah, so basically, your minimum rate of an hour is $100. If you travel and do one drive, you're still getting paid that $100 because
No. So there's a job on the table, right? The job on the table is, let's say it's $20, right? At the moment, let's say Uber I don't know what the actual percentage is. I'm just making this up. Uber takes 60% of that, and then 30% of that goes to maintenance, like fuel and stuff like that, right? So you only get paid 10% of that $20 journey, right? So you get paid $2, right? I'm saying you make it so that Uber takes much less of the cut on that journey, right? So instead of you getting paid a minimum wage, this hypothetical journey that's $20, Uber now only takes 30% of it, right? And the maintenance is 30%.
I see.
And then you get the other 40%, right? Now you're not getting paid 4 times as much. You're not getting paid a minimum wage because you've only accepted the jobs that you want.
So you're
to
just saying
accept.
take a percentage of the cut, changing the percentage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what you're
variable-
talking
Yes.
about
Well,
is
that's
changing
Uber's
the
cut.
margins that they pay.
But what about Uber and Lyft and their profits, dude?
But
Are you even thinking about the poor companies?
I think so. The
Okay,
problem is that
that's one
they've
way you
been
can make it
they've been,
equitable for the workers.
they've been operating at a loss the entire time, though, right? Like
Yeah, so
Uber.
it's a
Well,
I'm
one or
sorry,
the
go
other.
ahead.
No, and I would love to hear what you have to say. But yeah, you're sort of saying like you want a variable rate, like maybe like the normal rate is 40%, but like if it's to the point where like the end rate for that particular has got to be trip by trip, then right? What you're talking about, so it's got to be trip by trip. If that's the case,
Yes,
then
because that's what a gig is. That's the point. Yeah.
okay. Well, I thought you were just. So at
I
first,
mean, you're just
I thought you
arguing
were
for a different margin for the pay structure.
I thought at
So-
first. Hold on. Let me finish. At first, I thought you were arguing for like the total pay at the end of the day, right? That's where it sounded like you were going for.
No,
But no, you're talking about. Yes.
So for example,
Okay.
you only allow the business to accept trips that will make a certain amount of money, right? And they're going to do this anyway because trips that only get like 2 meters are not going to be profitable for them, right? Because they're whatever it is, or like there are going to be a length of trip that is not profitable for them. So you only allow, and they currently they accept those trips and then they push the non-profit onto the worker, right? Like the loss onto the worker, and we've seen this happen. So what you do is you make it so the company can only accept trips that operate at profit, and then you make it so that the profit that is made by that is equitable to the worker, right? So for example, if you choose to take 5 trips in an hour, right, you will be making enough to survive. Whereas if you only choose to make 1, right, you won't be making enough to survive, right? But the point is, if you were choosing to take more, you would be making enough to survive. So there needs to be a point at which, if you are choosing to, you can make enough to survive, and if you're not choosing to, well, you don't, right? But that's fine because that's your choice, and that's the point of the gig economy.
So basically, the two arguments you're kind of levering is changing kind of the algorithm in which they calculate things, and kind of like making a determination of what is useful and what isn't useful. And then 2 is kind of changing the percentage taken. This way you can have a more equitable treatment as opposed to just a direct minimum wage.
I'm plucking figures out of the air. But what I'm saying is that if you are choosing to drive full time for them, you should be paid enough to survive. Not necessarily by a minimum wage, but by like equitable distribution of the profits created by your labor.
Okay. So basically, you say kind of incentivize some degree of investment by the worker. This way they can like come out how much they need, but also making sure
Exactly.
like the whole thing doesn't just like kill the company.
Or
Exactly,
you're
right.
also
So
probably
that's the point of the gig economy. That's the point of the gig economy. You get to choose how much you will.
Oh man,
There it
his
goes.
internet's gone.
It's also
I
probably
thought that
like
was me.
it's also probably like, you know, taking the more profitable rides, shaving profit off those rides, and giving it to the less profitable rides.
Yeah.
Basically spreading.
Like I just want to
the
be clear
total-
when it comes to this idea, I have no problems with that. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
living in America, we would still write that down as like, yo, that's like a minimum wage or like a minimum rate. So like, yeah, like
Well,
I would be
I
100.
mean, you would consider different legal standards in terms of like minimum wage versus what he's proposing. So like within the argument, like within the gig economy, like the gig economy, it's rough, but like it does provide some benefit at least in our structures. So like that argument of like that kind of different legal standard and the different process versus like direct minimum wage, I'm like that's fair, like
Well,
basically
I'm maybe
incentivize them to
like
keep that work.
it's
Like
probably because I'm
the point
thinking
is,
at it. Hold on, this is probably because I'm thinking at it from like a different type. 'Cause, like I did gig work. Like I've been a comedian. I've went all over New York State. Usually, when I went to a venue or something and like offered my services and they accepted, I would get paid like a minimum. I'm not going to say wage, but like a minimum amount of money based on how much time I was there. So like if I
A
did a
contract.
30-minute, yeah, like a contract. If I, did like, 30 minutes or so, like, yeah, you get like this amount of money for like all the time you do. If you flub and you go off stage or like something like you get docked for that shit. So like that's how
Well,
I thought
isn't
about
this
it.
yeah.
isn't that the same thing that Spoon is saying here? Like
Yeah,
basically,
it's
it's like
basically that.
Yeah,
So like,
Spoon's
so like a,
Spoon's idea is actually a lot more realistic than we think, because
Yeah.
like we're always hearing Uber and Lyft don't make any money, which is true-ish, but the thing is that was factoring in a lot of AI driverless stuff that they were doing, and neither of them are doing that anymore. And so a lot of their like R&D and development and investments in that, those are gone.
well,
And so
also
they're
the reason
actually rapidly approaching profitability.
also the reason they were operating at a loss is because they were intentionally price gouging so they could control the market. So like they don't have to be doing that,
Exactly.
right?
So-
But it's just not the case.
So let's because I don't want this definition of the gig economy, we should have probably done this before, but like to narrow it down a bit more to what we are specifically talking about being like a working with an organization, right, and a non-contractual agreement where the worker can choose when they can schedule themselves, right, when they can work, but it's mediated through a tech platform, right? So so for Uber, like Uber's providing the platform of their app, so that people can find jobs on that app and then taking a cut of that, right? And on that, Twitch would fall into this as well, right? Providing a platform, you can work on it whenever you like, and yeah, it's kind of mediated through that.
Exactly. You couldn't expect Twitch to pay you a minimum wage to stream, could you? Right? That's ridiculous, right? Because your streaming might be crap and it might not make any money. Like it's ridiculous to
What?
ask this Twitch pays you a minimum
what about
wage.
the people
But
that take the 2
Spoon.
kilometer or 2 mile drives?
What about a minimum quality for your stream?
yeah, exactly
Wait,
right. So, but
Spoon,
if like
don't
that's
be
the point.
projection here.
But that's the point, right? So if Twitch could be like, actually, if you can reach these certain boundaries, right, we will monetize your thing, right? If you can like have this many viewers and that many viewers, this is actually why like in part why like the partner contract is a good thing. It's bad for a lot of other reasons, but in part is a good thing, right? When it gets to a certain point where they're like, actually, if you have like worker protections to an extent and like protections for us to a certain extent, we will monetize it and we will support you and we'll promote you. Then that's actually good, right? It's good for both of you because now you get like more and they're like secure in their investment. So that like is a good thing.
So I mean,
But like you can't be expected to pay a
well, I
minimum
mean,
wage. That's ridiculous.
I think for some, I don't know, maybe I'm talking out my ass here, but I mean, for the highest end streamers, they'll have like actual agreements with Twitch. And one, they'll get a higher cut of their subs, right? I am not getting that higher rate. Fuck you, Twitch. But and they'll I think they'll get like bonuses too, right? So it's like not a minimum wage, but they will get like a bonus to keep working there rather than going anywhere else. Yeah, if anyone wants to steal me, I'll take it. Fuck that shit.
Exactly right, and that's like an incentive, right? So like, if you are more profitable for the company allows you to like have more stuff, like be more profitable. Like it makes a lot of sense, and especially because it's like choose to work. You're choosing when to stream, you know, and like the profit is entirely reliant on your skill set or like whatever you bring. Like that's good. Like that's the point of the gig economy, right? And like the gig economy seems to be perfectly functional in most aspects, apart from this like specific example with like taxis. Like for example, in like graphic design is 66% of people employed in graphic design are gig workers, right? And it seems to work fine. It seems to work absolutely fine.
You know what would be an interesting way to turn this conversation is like.
And there's a big difference between this, right? Online gig workers and like in like physicality gig workers are very different because you can essentially work from anywhere, which makes it like it cuts the cost by a big load.
So I'm not sure, like we're just saying, like it works well. I mean, there are people who it doesn't work for. That doesn't necessarily mean that their skills are lacking, but for whatever reason they can't get jobs. Like just to assume like it's working well for the graphic designers.
But the reason they can't get jobs is because there isn't a demand for their jobs, right? It's that simple. And that like I understand that's like bad for the individual, but that is the market working well, right? People who are good at their jobs and have the connections and get the jobs.
I also hold on. I also wanted to talk about. So we've been focusing on Uber, but Uber isn't the only one. Like I said, Airbnb, and there are other ones too, but like those are the ones that were top of mind. Like Airbnb, well, okay. So there's multiple problems with Airbnb. One is the lack of quality control in terms of the housing that individuals stay at, right? So you can go to an Airbnb, or you can. There are a lot of listings there that are like really fucking sketchy, basically, right? Like people have like shown this, right? There's a lot of common to be mined out of some of these Airbnb postings, right? But there's no minimum standard when compared to, for instance, like a hotel or a motel, right? In which you have a much better idea of what you'll be getting. Two, there's safety, right? Let me finish. Yeah, so there's safety, which like you're in someone else's house and who knows how that'll go. Three, there's privacy. This in the US in hotels, you're usually pretty good with this. In South Korea, not so much. But in the US, usually it's not a problem. That you can go into a hotel and expect there not to be hidden cameras, because that's the thing that happens. A lot of women have reported that they go into an Airbnb, they found out that some guy was like had a hidden camera in their room. That's the thing that happens there. So there's that, and then so that's on the consumer side. But I don't know anything as much for the like the provider side in terms of like the person providing the space. I don't know any negatives on that side. But on the city side, it's problematic because of like its effect on hotels, right? One, hotels, and two, the prices of apartments, right? Because people are renting those apartments rather than living in those apartments. People are buying apartments out specifically for Airbnb, and it raises the prices of renting like citywide. This is an issue that they're having, right? So Airbnb is contributing to all of these things, and so like it can be more. So like with Uber, we're focusing on the problem of the worker, right? The worker there being the driver. And in this case, it's, as far as I know, it's less the worker that has the problem, but everyone else involved in the agreement.
So
So,
go ahead.
no, you go ahead. I've talked a lot. Go ahead.
That's fine. So, I live here in Austin, and we do all sorts of Airbnbs for Circuit of the Americas, all sorts of events that happen here. And I can validate everything Prime said because, got to include all the Californians moving here. But people are going out and buying these properties in order to use them as Airbnbs. So it's like, yes, the rates of housing are increasing pretty astronomically. This doesn't help it at all. But to go towards the quality versus availability thing, that's one of the risks of using the service known as Airbnb. You don't necessarily get the guaranteed product that a hotel or motel would provide. And it's up to the consumer to know, I'm about to go into this super sketchy place. I shouldn't book this. I should maybe book another one or find a hotel if it's available.
Yeah, so funnily enough, Lithuania actually addressed this in 2016. I was reading this off earlier. Okay, I don't just know that off the top of my head. Lithuania addressed this in 2016.
Lithuania
like,
might be,
well,
maybe you're reading the Lithuanian Times every morning. I don't know. I don't put it past you.
So
Wait. You don't want to go with a Lithuanian. Now you're talking about Lithuanians. Do you have like a thing for Lithuanians?
No.
Wait, you
That's
guys
just, it
don't read
came
the
into my head earlier
Lithuanian
because I was reading it.
Right.
Anyway, they addressed this in 2016. So they're like, oh yeah, Uber's like not like terrible. Like we can get along with Uber, but like you're right. Like what if the car's like really shitty and like it doesn't pass an MOT? Like we need consumer protections here. So like Uber, if anyone drives you, you gotta make sure they've like passed their MOT and like their fucking car's fine and like the person can actually drive. They have like decent eyesight and stuff like that, right? And that was like much better, and much the same with like Airbnb, right? The consumer protections are very important there, and you can go to Airbnb and say, well, actually, anyone who signs up to your website, you have to send someone round and be like, yes, this place is suitable for living. Yes, this place doesn't have any hidden cameras. Yes, this place is, it's fine, right? And that's like a really good consumer protection to have. As far as like the housing issue goes, the housing market is fucked. Sorry, okay, it's just fucked. There's not specifically a problem with Airbnb. Like the point is, the people who can afford to buy houses are buying houses, and the majority of people can't afford to buy houses. Funny that, right? So yes, like this is always going to be the issue, right? Inflated housing prices, it's always going to be the issue. The only people who can buy houses are the people who already have houses, right? Because they're renting, because they're landlords, right? Because they're extracting surplus, blah blah blah, capitalism. All right. So it's like this is not specifically an Airbnb problem, right? That is a capitalism problem. That is like specifically a capitalism problem.
Yeah, it's so true. As much as I fucking hate Airbnb, I live in San Francisco. We have a huge Airbnb problem where people are just fucking, instead of renting out their houses to people who might work around here and who might otherwise just increase the efficiency of their life by being able to live in the city, like instead we're renting it out to some fucking people who are on vacation. Like there's plenty of places they can fucking go. There's no shortage of places to get a fucking hotel or a motel in the city. Fuck that. Like I fucking hate Airbnb. That's one of those companies that I wish we could just regulate out of existence. But with that said, I mean, everything sneaky debate, man, kind of also.
Yeah,
like, this is just capitalism. And this problem would exist whether we like it or not. Those people would fucking not be in their houses. This would be their second house, whatever. Like we already had a huge problem in the city with not enough housing. And...
No. This Airbnb specifically exacerbates this, right? Because you're saying, oh, well, they got just one more apartment, right? And they're raising the price. And otherwise, that would just be their second place. No.
But
No, first of all,
they don't.
like it's incentivizing people to get a second place, and then they can get more than one of these things, right? So they can continue buying up apartments, and then or houses and renting them out continuously rather than living there. There's actually incentivizing that issue.
Yeah, but there's like the reason they do that, I assume, is because it's more profitable to do so, and they'd probably be doing that otherwise, right? So like having like
Not necessarily.
a regular tenant, right? It's obviously more reliable, right? But obviously the price is cheaper because we're not inflating the housing market by limiting the supply that way, right? So having a regular tenant is more reliable, but I assume it's also doesn't make you as
Well,
much money.
you could also
So what
make
they'd
the
rather-
argument that because of like in terms of like relationship, right, is like when you're like a renter, you have to have a lease, you have to have all these different like legal mechanisms that make you kind of more bound by rules. But in like terms of like Airbnb, you're like, okay,
Exactly.
you come in for this time, and like I have some guaranteed basic standards that aren't really like regulated in any significant way, and that's the problem, right? Is like basically it's kind of like skirting around like these traditional methods of like renting and relationships. Therefore, you're like trying to avoid a lot of like the responsibility while trying to maximize your profits, and
Exactly.
like that's the whole relationship that occurs.
Exactly, right? So like it's likely like better for the person doing it because otherwise they would just get a regular tenant, right? Like it seems like more reasonable they would just get a regular tenant if it wasn't better for them just to have a second place and do Airbnb with it, right? So like that they would do this either way, right? If they don't want a regular tenant and there's an option not to have a regular tenant, whether Airbnb exists as like a company, like this, like that
No.
market was always going to come about.
No. The you are creating a marketplace, right? That makes it easier one to find tenants, right? You're making more landlords of people who otherwise would not be landlords. Some people would there's a certain percentage, certain overlap, in which some of these individuals would have entered that market in which way, right, and gone about it in the traditional fashion. You are actually creating a marketplace which becomes easier to be a landlord, right, lowering the barrier of entry to becoming a landlord. You don't have to do all those like to become an actual landlord. Like you have to get like there's like certain like regulations that need to be followed, right? Certain standards need to be met. Certain like contracts you have to write up. All those go away. So you're vastly lowering the entry level to get in. But and then from there, because it's so is all you need, like rather than, like because how usual landlords do it, landlords like traditional landlords don't pick and choose like apartments in like different buildings or anything. No, they'll buy a building and then they'll make that like their how they get their income, right? Like the property that they rent out. But for others, they don't do this. So they are taking random apartments and buildings across a city off the market. You're taking them off the market, and then you can make more money doing it that way because you can have renter after renter after renter coming in and out of these things, and the net gain at the end is much higher than you have for an individual renter. So like,
Okay, but the question then comes is like what income bracket of people are going to be the ones kind of taking advantage of Airbnb? I would levy that typically you're going to have like more higher income levels for using Airbnb because you basically like the amount of people who have space to kind of like dedicate to like dedicating for Airbnb, like the amount of time that they're going to have available, you're probably going to have people who either own homes already or own like a second home, or they have like a large home that they can kind of rent off a space. So I would probably make the argument that it's the same kind of people who might rent it out. They're like, okay, well, all of these properties are already owned, but I have a decent income level and decent level of wealth, so I'm going to take advantage of these Airbnb processes as opposed to like more poor people who are going to take advantage of it.
I think this is why I'm like fundamentally against, and like I said, even though I think that we would have a lot of the problems that we see with that Airbnb cause, we would still see those problems. I still would like to regulate Airbnb out of existence because just like what Prime was saying, like you know, on top of all of the regulations, there's inspections that you have to go through to be able to have a place to rent out. There's laws that protect the renters. There's laws that protect the people renting. Whether those laws are perfect or not is definitely debatable. But like, there's at least something in place. With Airbnb, it's nothing. And this is why like I think Airbnb is definitely different. than Uber and Lyft. Because also who is benefiting, like Wordy was saying, like who's benefiting from Airbnb? It's going to be homeowners. Homeowners naturally going to have a higher net wealth. I mean, these are just wealthier people in general. I don't think like you're seeing a single family renting out their fucking spare bedroom on an Airbnb to like make fucking ends meet. Like that's not how Airbnbs work. You rent out your spare house. You know what I mean? Or you use your spare house as an Airbnb, not
Yeah,
like
but
for
like he's
so
saying that like it functions in the same way as a landlord would. However, you don't actually have to be like a landlord in a
Yeah.
traditional sense, so you can skirt the barriers. Which,
exactly.
like, I think this begs the question, like, well, what's the answer to this, right? Do you make the
Well, the answer
barrier
is
to
just get rid of
entry
it.
to the barrier
Yeah,
to
I
entry to
mean,
Airbnb higher? Like, be like, if you have an
I agree
Airbnb,
with
you have to
Captain
like
Jones.
I,
I think the solution is just to like nix it. Like,
yeah, like I don't agree. I think that if you like, I don't know what we would have to say and whether how easy it would be to get around the law, blah blah blah. But I don't think like if you're moving in for any amount of time into a place, like yeah, that
I
should
mean,
be
like
regulated.
typically, like which people are going to take more advantage of like legal loopholes. It's not going to be like poor people. It's going to usually be richer people because they're like, okay, well, I can maximize my profits here and have less like legal problems I have to deal with as a whole. So like this whole argument like poor people or people who have like already have barriers to entry or whatever, I don't really buy it. It's more of people who are like probably going to be relatively well off. They're like, hey, I can make advantage of this, and
but
you
even
don't have to
then,
give
right?
time frames. You don't have to do anything for that.
But even then, right, the people who benefit from this are the consumer, right? Like Airbnb is like cheap and like generally speaking, they tend to be quite good. I mean, like, as long as they don't have hidden cameras and shit in them, which again you can always check for once you're there. Although it might leave you a bit paranoid. So like the consumer is going to benefit from this, right? And like
Sure,
obviously
the
the person
consumer
supplying
benefits,
the
but
uh,
like the whole relationship in itself is a problem in the first place, right? You can do a lot of things that the consumer benefits from, but it doesn't mean like it's a good practice, right? Is like if you think about the whole relationship, well, if the consumer is coming in, like there's a lot of problems for the consumer. Is like the quality of the place they're going to be staying at, the accessibility, like all these other aspects that you can't necessarily like account for before you kind of make that contractual
but
relationship.
you
Is
can't
like
address that though. Like I said, like what Lithuania did, you can address that. You can be like, actually, Airbnb, anyone who signs up to your website, you have to make sure that their place is like up to spec, right? And then you've got the consumer protections in order there, which means the consumer is like absolutely fine in this case, and the only person who's actually getting hurt in this interaction is the people who are having the rent inflated in their area because somebody else owns like what is effectively like a short-term landlord, right? But without actually any of the responsibilities of being a landlord.
but
Yeah,
how
I mean, I think
feasible
that
is it for like Airbnb to kind of like do those inspections, right? If you would say like Airbnb is like existing as a whole, and they're like, do you have to like 20 like workers in Lithuania just to kind of like explore all the different Airbnb spots? No, you don't. So you're basically kind of having to rely on like the producer here to like show all the pictures and all this
That's what you
saying,
do.
oh, I'm meeting
That's
this
what you do.
quality.
Yeah, you say
Yeah,
to
but the
Airbnb,
problem
the government
comes
doesn't
is
it?
like, well, the problem comes is in terms of like home inspection, right? We actually have home inspectors who actually go to the building and kind of just check it out to make sure everything's up to part, up to code, and that whole relationship is like a little problematic. The actual amount of insight you have in terms of Airbnb is going to be relatively limited for a company, private company, because you're not going to feasibly have enough people to deal with all the different people who are going to offer their homes as Airbnb.
yeah, what I want to know is like what I want to know. This is a rhetorical question. There is no operating standards that are given to Airbnb room and boards or whatever the fuck Airbnbs. But there are standards that motels, hotels, and Holiday Inns have to abide by. It's simply not fair that these Airbnbs don't have to
Yeah,
abide by
get
the
to
same
skirt that.
standards.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
It's simply not
this
fair for the existing commercial infrastructure. And these are commercial facilities that are doing the hotels and motels. They have to abide by a lot of different
this
regulations,
is
safety, etc.
also true for Uber in terms of the regulations that taxis have to abide by, but Ubers don't. I would think you actually could do that. You could like inspect Airbnb rentals. Like this is not an a hill that's too steep to climb. right? Like
No.
what you could do is like what you could really do is like if you want to regulate them, say that we will like hire more inspectors for this. But Airbnb and any other company that gets involved in this market, and there are others who are trying to break in, right? You have to chip in, right? If you want to operate in our city, in our locality, well, then you've got to chip in to help hire these individuals, right? And then you just kind of work your way through. It's not like these things have to be like done all simultaneously. Just like throughout the course of a year, you could definitely do them all.
Yeah,
and
if
they
you
don't
want your
necessarily have to hire on new people just that their job is to inspect things. They can subcontract people out
Exactly.
to do inspections and contribute to more gig work there.
yeah, and if they,
And Airbnb and private companies have the ability to self-regulate themselves. They can create some
No.
emblem or whatever that
No,
says
no,
this has
no,
been
No,
externally
let's not
it's-
tell them
verified
to
by X, Y, and Z.
self-regulate.
No, you don't.
Wait, it's
you
more-
don't
it's
know
more
that.
abilities
ethical.
to-
I just want like this is why I said the way I did, right? Like the city or the locality hiring their own like group, right? Like with Airbnb chipping in, right? So it's not a burden placed on the taxpayer, so that they could do that themselves. They can provide the seal of approval, right? Like Airbnb, like doing that themselves. Okay, that's terrible idea.
You,
and they
you do
might
like a
then like
Florida condos where you just hire somebody who actually worked for the company.
yeah, they might like shift that burden onto the consumer, like this extra cost, but like that's probably okay because you're paying for consumer protections, right? You're paying for like no hidden cameras, you're paying for make sure the building is not gonna like fall on you while you're asleep.
Airbnb
like-
ain't cheap.
Yeah, I think it's probably like okay. I think I'm okay with that. Like I think the bigger issue here is not consumer protections or if we can implement them. I think it's a fairly straightforward thing. I think the bigger issue is the fact that you can effectively be a landlord while skirting the actual responsibilities of being a landlord.
I mean, they
Yeah,
still have to
hotel
maintain the
by-
facility. They have to make sure the air conditioner is working and that the water's working. Because if it doesn't, the people that come in and stay there for a night are going to be like, "Hey, your stuff's broken. I want my money back." And it's
You have to technically do it, but the problem comes is like one, you're going to think
the
about how
same
you're
goes
going
with
to
a
try and get your money
landlord. You
back.
technically have to.
Okay, but there's
I mean, but
more.
like-
there's more.
But
There's
when
more
you're in an
local.
Airbnb,
There's more regulation in terms of like dealing with landlords, right? If you talk
Yeah.
about the Airbnb, you're like, okay, I want my money back. Well, talk to Airbnb and get your money back, and that's the whole relationship itself, right? You're having to go through that third party that doesn't have really incentive to actually reimburse you. So
Well, this
basically,
is-
it's like that whole like
What this is about is legal protections. It's about legal protections for the people who might be harmed by anybody involved, whether it's the renter or the person who's doing the renting. Like if I'm harmed by an Airbnb that I go to, what are my legal protections versus if I'm harmed in a hotel? And then on top of that, like what are the chances that I get harmed in a hotel versus the chances that I get harmed in an Airbnb? Like I think that's where we can pin Airbnb specifically and say, you have to abide by the same laws that everyone else does in the marketplace in terms of being a hotel/motel. And fuck
Yeah, it's-
Airbnb. That's what I'm
And
saying.
I think this like again inflating like the rent prices, like this just happens already. Like people buy up property to inflate rent prices already. Like this is just like a thing that rich people can do. Like I'm afraid we live in a society where like the richer you are, the easier it is to accrue wealth, and the poorer you are, the harder it is to accrue wealth. And this is just one
Yes.
example of that.
No.
So
Wait.
I'm less perturbed by like a rich person buying a house that they move into. Like let's just use San Francisco, my example. Like oftentimes the people moving in are pretty fucking wealthy and they're paying a lot and they live there because their job is downtown and now they're living downtown and now they get to walk to fucking work. And how awesome is that for them? They get to walk by fucking sites, fucking sight glass, get some fucking handmade coffee. You know what I mean? Get a goddamn fucking Danish. It's awesome. It's great for them. And I'm not necessarily against like, I don't know. We do have to get away from this notion that like living in like or like living a high class lifestyle. I mean, if you're which is not everybody in San Francisco, but it's a lot of motherfuckers in San Francisco. It comes with a price, and like not everyone can live downtown. I don't think that should necessarily be the policy.
I would also levy the argument. Like the reality is like, yes, it's going to be a problem regardless if you're like a landlord or Airbnb. But Airbnb renters here have a lot less like responsibility comparatively, and so that itself is like you're basically saying, okay, well, this problem's going to exist regardless because that's just kind of how like landlords exist. But when you basically reduce the amount of like responsibilities or thresholds or standards you have to meet, and you could say that, oh, they have to meet these basic standards, but like the whole relationship between Airbnb, the problem comes is like you remove these protections or you remove these standards and you remove the amount of accountability that exists, you're basically just letting the issue become worse. And so that's the
Yeah,
problem.
as long as there are like reasonable consumer protections in place, which you would, again, like the government would enforce this on Airbnb, and then obviously it'd be in Airbnb's interest, and then breathe down the neck of the people who are renting out their houses. Like, I think that would be fine, right? As long as you get your money back if like there's a dispute or like, you know, the building is up to code. Like, I don't really see that as much of an issue.
Yeah, I just don't like, so like the reason I don't like Airbnb is it takes houses and it gives them to tourists. And those houses are needed, in my opinion, they should be occupied by people who live in the area who will benefit directly by living there, you know, and not some tourist, you know, that's like 95% of fucking what Airbnb is. It's just tourists, or just fucking I'm going to get a little house in Napa so I could get away with my girl for the weekend, like that. And
So-
I just don't see that as like a proper use of housing being this commodity that's like so important to everybody, that's so essential. And that's why I treat it so much differently than like Uber or Lyft, even though maybe in principle they're similar.
So your belief is that in downtown San Francisco, houses that are, or apartments, whatever, that are currently Airbnbs should be not Airbnbs, but offered as standard cost for where they are housing for those types of people.
They should be rental units, yeah.
For people that can afford the current price for where that house is.
Yeah, I mean, like, if we
Okay.
want to get into a whole different like discussion about what we can do to like keep low income people from getting driven out of their housing, or keep like the availability of low income housing at a certain level or higher in a given area or something, like, I'm definitely down for that. But yeah, I
that's
think
fair.
like the market does have to decide what the price for certain fucking things are. And like, especially if we're talking about a goddamn like really nice place in downtown, well, yeah, that's gonna cost a lot of fucking money, and that's a lot of the places.
Sounding like a market socialist to me.
I know. Well,
Well,
that's kind of
like,
what I am.
I agree a lot with Captain Jones just said, and I see where the Turk is coming from a little bit when you asked that question. For me, it's like, if they're like in downtown central of like a big city or something, and you know people want to live there, yeah, put the houses up for fucking market. You know, they're rental units, right? If it's like a bunch of abandoned houses somewhere, I'd say like for the city, like, yo,
I
take
want
those
to do
properties.
that Airbnb.
Well,
No,
like,
I mean,
and
like,
here's the thing.
no,
In this,
but like, no, but like
An
that's the thing,
abandoned
right?
house of
But like,
Airbnb.
Airbnb squatters.
but like we're talking about like corporations and stuff, so like, yeah, they can buy like low quality houses, fix them up, and then like use them for Airbnbs, and like that's not unheard of. So when I think about that, instead of that, I would like it if the cities did that and be like, yo, this is gonna be like, you know, emergency housing, like if you're homeless or something, or if you need to find a house, or if you've been kicked out or some shit like that. Like, have the cities do it. If they're just like shitty properties that are, you know, going to go back to the city anyway, or like, you know, they just been abandoned or some shit like that.
so yeah, I'm see, like, I'm definitely in favor of the city like buying large units that could be made into apartment buildings, and then making those low income houses, or like targeted rent control. I live in a rent controlled building, but these things should be targeted.
And those aren't Airbnb facilities.
Exactly, those aren't Airbnb. Exactly. And like, so like, I don't know. I'm really in favor of getting rid of an Airbnb by just making them abide by these regulations. I don't think they'd be able to survive. I don't think you would find a lot of people willing to be have their places inspected, or that they would pass muster.
Airbnb wouldn't care. They would say, okay, that's the regulation. All of you renters, y'all have to abide by what these new rules are. We might help you pay for X, Y, and Z to get checked off on a list or whatever, but it's going to be up to the renter, the person providing the service, like the drivers. And then, of course, the consumers pay the downstream costs for that. So,
Yeah, I think it's right. I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Spoon, I do have one curious question. After the 2016 implementation in Lithuania, did the Airbnb rentals increase or decrease?
No, so I was talking about what they did with Uber. So like what they did was like make sure the cars were up to stand, stuff like that. So they didn't actually do this with hotels. Or Airbnb. I was just using it as an example.
I would be curious to see as the regulation occurred, and then see if the survivability of that gig company itself. I would be curious to see that.
I don't think Uber like failed in Lithuania after they implemented that
like-
you have to have your
but-
car up to a certain scratch, and like Uber's got to make sure
Yeah,
that the
but you would
cars that they
ask-
employ are fine.
You would ask how like comparison before and after they implemented that regulation, and see how long it survives as a whole, or like
Yeah,
how much like.
I think they're still going strong. I don't think it was like a major impact. If anything, like the consumer protection just like made people use Uber more because they knew it was safer. Like if anything, I think it would have been a positive. I'm speculating, but I don't think it was bad.
I'm actually thinking more about my idea of trying to regulate Airbnb into out of existence, and I'm not sure if that's even the way to do it. Because yeah, I think like going back to your Uber example, they're just gonna pass it on to the driver or the house owner as the responsibility to get it checked out, and they're gonna do it because now they're in this position where they're kind of forced to do it if they want to.
Well, you could
these-
potentially implement a piece of legislation that you say like, okay, these are the standards that I have to have, and you as a company have to provide the financial assistance in that regard in order to help cover those costs. You could potentially do that. Well, the feasibility, I don't know, but you could potentially implement those standards and have the
I don't think
company.
you can do
Well,
that.
because like if you think about if you're a homeowner, think about this. Like you're a homeowner and you just bought this home and you've got X amount of debt now, and you bought this home because you wanted to do Airbnb. And so now the government comes in, they say you need to do a ramp, you need to have a fucking new sink, you need to whatever it is. Make it more accessible. The doorways have to be widened. Well, that's going to cost $100,000, but I'm already a fucking million in debt right now from the fucking house that I just purchased in downtown San Francisco that I'm trying to rent out as an Airbnb. Like that's an easy sell for me to just sink another 200,000.
Airbnb are not going to front these costs, not at all. And I don't think you could legislate that. Like, yes, you have to pay for like these people to like get their houses checked out, like in much the same way that you have to pay for like an MOT and then like show that your car has an MOT to work for Uber.
Wait,
but you would have to make sure.
Why? The question I would ask is why couldn't you? What barriers to entry would you propose that?
So again,
that cause that issue.
So this would be like saying that not Uber just has to check that your car has an MOT and is like roadworthy, but Uber has to pay for your car's MOT and make sure it's roadworthy. And again, at that point, you're no longer a gig worker. You're independent.
Yeah, you're an employee.
Yeah, you're an employee, right? And I think that's exactly the same reason why Airbnb wouldn't do it.
Well,
Airbnb would say if you want to sign up to our website,
there's
you
plenty
have
of
to have
contract
these
workers that
things.
have to apply and do what the contract says, and when it comes to checking the boxes of being acceptable to work, for example, the people that worked at the Met Gala, they probably are gig workers that had to say, okay, I have to wear a mask and do X, Y, and Z in order to comply with that facility's thing. So it's like they're still a gig worker. They're not dependent on the regulation. The gig defines what they have to be able
Exactly, yeah, exactly, right. Airbnb would just say, no, we're not going to accept you at Airbnb unless you've had your house checked out and is up to code, right? And the cost would effectively be passed on to the owner of the house.
At best, they might tell you where to go to get this done, but like, they're not footing
they wouldn't
like,
front the cost.
They'll provide a link for you to like submit your report in and be like, here you go, here's the mailbox now, like how much that costs. That's on you because contract worker.
The only way I'd see that, and of course y'all shot this down, is that if Airbnb provided a person to come and inspect your home, and then on the Airbnb service provided a seal that said this was checked by Tom Foolery and it's a-okay by Airbnb standards, but y'all didn't like that idea.
Who's Tom Foolery?
He's a Twitch or a YouTube streamer, and it was just the name that came.
I know who he is. I was memeing. He's banned on Twitch.
It wouldn't be a Airbnb standard. It would be like a governmental standard. Like I don't know if you have this in America, but like
the guy that did it was certified with some organization.
Exactly.
On the site, they would say that this has been certified.
Yeah. But I think that would be fine.
But it's the company self-regulating at that point, and y'all didn't like that.
Yeah. So another thing
the reliability of company self-regulation is that if you just have the company do it on its own, you can't really reasonably expect it to like achieve that end. Like there's a lot of problems come to like reliability. Like we look at different agencies and different like corporations, they're basically going to be kind of ensuring like their profits and all that stuff, but the actual like quality of like the workplace or whatever factors itself, there's kind of a problem unless you have like a third party government oversight agency. There's not going to be a really guarantee.
That plenty of companies bend to social pressures, and there's plenty of instances where companies have changed their actions and what the standards they apply across their
In the
entire
same
I
token,
would need
though,
you
like
to cite
in the
something.
same, well, no, like in the same token, because like if we just take that, I can say there are plenty of examples where companies say they'll self-regulate and then they just do not, and then
I
like
think
shit goes horribly wrong.
I
and stuff. So, like we could,
think as like an alternative, I'm okay with Airbnb self-regulating, and then if we find out that they're not actually complying with like regulation, like we set the regulations, and they just say like yes, we're adhering to them, right? And like so, like they're self-regulating, but they don't get to decide the regulations. And then if they're not, obviously, if they're just lying, then we can come down on them, right? I think that's fine. Like we don't have to be
I
like
would say if you're
setting the
going to have some
regulations and enforcing
form of
them.
if you're going to have some form of self-regulation, I would like at least some consistent checkup policies, kind of like just saying if like the company say we're going to do this and this and that, and then like kind of like a health inspector comes in every once in a while. And it's like, are you filling all these factors? And then like you check it out, and you're like, oh, you're not doing this. You're like, yeah,
Well,
get your
like,
shit together, and
Yeah, I'm happy with like Airbnb to be audited every now and again. It's like, hold on, are you actually reporting correctly on yourself? Like that seems like cheaper for us, and then we can front the cost onto Airbnb as well, actually, right? Instead of like the government doing it.
Especially for all those Airbnbs that are like out in the sticks that are just rundown houses that are like $20 a month, like tyrant.
Yeah,
houses.
definitely. Yeah, fuck yeah. I think that's actually probably a better idea. Just like auditing Airbnb every now and again and be like, are you actually self-reporting truthfully? And if they're not, fucking we can come down on them if they are.
I
But
don't
great.
know. So I'm looking at the. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm looking at the hotel, motel, rooming house operating standards for like for the city of Oakland, and I'm like, if we just made Airbnb places abide by these regulations, which are pretty fucking stringent, actually, this is actually a lot of money that motherfuckers would have to.
well, what are
invest
some
into
of the
their properties.
regulations that they list
And
that you think like would hit B&B that hard?
Probably
so
like
it's actually not
Ansel water
necessarily
system for
what would be
fires.
it would be the individual homeowners that would bear the brunt of this cost, that they
Yeah,
would
there's
have
probably
to
like
upgrade their houses to get.
serviceability standards. There's
Exactly.
emergency preparedness standards.
Exactly. You gotta
Evacuation
have
stuff.
security deadbolts, security locks on your windows. Make sure,
Fire
there's a
escape shit
ton.
like that.
I think that probably solves both issues as well, because then that disincentivizes people from
doing it in the future.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
from like being like, right, I'm going to buy this like apartment up, but actually to be an Airbnb, I have to like comply with these standards, right? And Airbnb is not going to accept me if I don't comply with these standards. And if I go to Airbnb and they do accept me and I'm not complying with these standards, both Airbnb and I am in trouble, right? So like that actually seems quite reasonable.
I'm going to meme just a little bit here. Okay.
Oh, no.
So you talk about like homeowners and all the different inspection agencies to come and check on their homes, make sure it's like livable, so they don't condemn and everything. And then you propose legislation and you just basically put them together. It's like every single homeowner, you're like, okay, you are a potential Airbnb renter. Okay, you need to match.
Yeah, like if they want to apply like Airbnb, so like the process is Airbnb says, right, if you want to be on our website, you need to have these documents showing you're complying with the local area's restrictions, right? The restrictions are obviously set by the government. The then Airbnb renter is then disincentivized to buying up housing because it has to comply with all these fucking stringent restrictions to be part of Airbnb. So that solves like the housing crisis problem. However, for those people who still have like Airbnbs, they can then comply with these restrictions. They report like show Airbnb that they've got these restrictions. Airbnb at that point then has to go, yes, you are complying with restrictions. That's fine. We accept that you're complying with restrictions. And then every now and again, we audit Airbnb to make sure they haven't accepted anyone who isn't complying with restrictions. And, if they are, get fucked, right? I think that's fine. You've got consumer protections there that solves the marketing issue. I think that's fine.
And you mix that with other policies like incentivizing single family homes to become duplexes and quadplexes that you can rent out to multiple families. You do that, and now all of a sudden, for an investor who's got a lot of money and they have this fucking property, instead of doing the Airbnb route, it's way more financially beneficial for them to actually just rent to upgrade their homes into these duplexers or quadplex sites,
Exactly.
and then rent them out to actually legitimate, people who are going to be
Yeah.
there working in the area.
Exactly. So if they really want to do an Airbnb, they can. It's just like disincentivized through legislation, right? And Airbnb like gets in shit if they're not adhering to this legislation or making sure that their renters don't have this legislation. And that solves both issues, right? You've got consumer protections and it solves the marketing issue. And that
Gets rid of the dangerous places and keeps the the not dangerous places and the good places.
The Council of Housing
managed.
Geniuses.
I think it's fine. I think that's an equitable solution for everyone. You get consumer protections, you get market protections. Airbnb gets fucked. I'm fine with it all.
Chat, you heard it here. We fixed the housing problem. We did it.
We did it, folks.
Only here on PrimeCayes Small Council. Subscribe today for more housing solution needs.
Yep. I'll be releasing my study with Pyro Tyrant, Turk, Spoon, and Captain A. Jones with PrimeCayes as our peer review processor. And it'll be coming up in like 2.
A critical analysis of Airbnb.
I say we get Sneaky Debate Man to read it all. It'll give it 1,000.
Oh yeah, like no, we're not presenting a study, right? We're taking this straight to the floors of Congress. Sneaky Debate Man, you're like our mascot here,
Hop
right?
in there.
You got to make it sound good.
Oh, he just has to say it. It's fine. He's got the accent that makes it sound
listen,
good.
If they ask you if you're American, if they ask you if you're American, you just be like, yo, I plead the fifth. That's my right. And they won't ask questions.
Turk?
Wait. Foreign investors or foreign lobbyists propose tons of legislation all the time. What's the difference?
The Turk?
They gonna look behind him and they gonna see the people standing behind him. They're gonna be like, nah.
So
I propose this in my own parliament first.
So back to it. Yeah. So the gig economy overall, I appreciate the flexibility, but I feel like that flexibility comes at the cost of protections from individuals, right? That we have a whole, over the decades, and maybe this is just because the gig economy as we defined it previously is new, right? That might just be the issue in of itself, because over the decades, not like all these other more traditional industries started off with these regulations right in place that society knew how to handle these things, right? At some point there was a regulatory body created because these problems kept happening. So then I think we need to bring in these new types of work, right? This new way of interacting with the economy into that regulatory body. But at the same time, I don't want to stifle innovation, right? So a story that I've told many times before is that when I was in Japan, was it Japan? Yeah, it was Japan. I was in Tokyo. Me and my friend were at a club, my white friend. We're at a club. And we left, and at that point, all the subways had closed. Right, they closed them really early in Tokyo, like ridiculously early. It's really fucking stupid. And then so we were very far away, so we had to take a taxi to get home. And it started to rain, like extremely. It started to downpour. It was a huge downpour. And as we were going through, my friend was like, we were walking along the road. My friend's like, oh, hey, why don't you stick your hand out there and call a taxi? I'm like, okay, but it's not gonna work. And no, he's like, no, do it, just do it, right? So I got in the road, put my hand out for a taxi, just kept going by. He's like, no, you're not far enough out. I'm like, oh, okay. And so this was a huge boulevard. It was it's 6 lanes, I think, altogether. And so I was out into the second lane. I was in the middle of the road with my hand out, and these taxis just kept going by. And I'm like, they're not going to stop for me, right? And he's like, no, it's not a race thing, right? I'm like, all right, you give it a try. He steps out on the road immediately. Taxi stops. So But like that's how it is for black people, not just in this country but in other countries. Like there was, you heard comedians talk about all the time how you couldn't get a taxi as a black man, and yeah, that's true. I've had taxis that have shown up and then they're like, because like a hotel called them, and clearly they didn't want to be there as soon as they saw me.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the tax industry has known about this for as long as anyone else has known about this. They've known the problem, and they didn't give a shit. They did nothing. They did zero to address the problem. Uber comes in, and they have the same issue, and that like when they first started, like I think they had pictures like attached to the riders. I wasn't involved in Uber at that time, but they had pictures attached to the riders, and they would send those pictures like as a helpful thing to the driver, like, oh, this is the person you're looking for. And if it was a black driver, all of a sudden, oh, I can't take this one. I can't, or a black customer, I can't take this this particular job. So this would happen all the time, or going to certain areas, right? Like, oh, they don't want to come. So Uber addressed this. It's like, okay, we're going to take away your ability to see these, see the name and the picture, right? Until you get over there, right? And that you can't be refusing jobs from like various places. They actually addressed the issue. They did, and Uber has been so much more helpful than the taxi industry in general. Like in terms of me moving around, so much more helpful. Like I appreciate that. Like they actually saw a problem and they tackled the issue. Unlike the taxi industry that just literally did not care. So like I've been criticizing them, but I don't want to like stifle that type of innovation, especially if they're actually addressing problems as they come up.
Yeah, and this is exactly what I was kind of trying to say with the other part of the gig economy that we never hear about. Like there's an app and a fucking service for everything. Like you can get a dishwasher, you can get somebody to fucking hang a picture up for you, you can get somebody to do whatever the fuck your little tiny heart desires. You know what I mean? And like that's a good thing. It's a good thing for like I used to be work construction, work odd jobs and shit like that. And like I didn't have an app, and I really that probably would have benefited me a lot to have like some place to advertise my skills. But like you know that I think that there's a lot of people who are in this situation. We could say, oh, they should educate. I don't like the argument like they should educate themselves. Like first I think it's a little insulting sometimes. Like yeah, I might not have been paid a lot as a carpet when I was doing carpentry, for instance. But that's a fairly skilled trade to have and to know how to do. So like uh I don't like that argument. If it pays, but there's got to be people on the lower end of the rungs who are making $15 an hour. I mean, if we advocate for a $15 minimum wage, that means that somebody's getting paid that $15, and we better be damn well and happy with the fucking wage that they're getting paid if we're advocating for it. So, like, I don't know. As one of those people in the past, like, eh, eh, and I mean, going into the future, I'm actually getting my car repaired right now to do Uber and Lyft. So because I live in the city, I have a huge advantage over most of the other drivers who don't even live in the city. So like I'm gonna do that now. So actually, I maybe TBD on my final judgment on Uber and Lyft. Once I start driving for them, I'll let you know. But like I do think that the flexibility of it is one of the huge factors that
It's-
is
Well,
driving me
yeah,
towards it.
there is a significant benefit that comes from this line of work, but the problem comes is kind of like the lack of protections, right? Is like
Totally.
it's like a vulnerable job position, right? It's like there's a lot of stuff that has a significant amount of benefits in terms of like work.
The-
It's the you basically have to try and work to minimize the negatives here, so you can like maximize the positives, and that's the whole process that
Like the-
comes is like
the issue is how these like gig platforms interact with the market and how they're predatory in the market and how this puts downward pressure on wages and working conditions. right? That is the issue. So like the original question, is it like up inherently the gig economy is bad, or is it just like these companies? It is just the companies. The gig economy actually, like, it works fine as long as you have healthy competition, and that healthy competition gets stifled when you have predatory marketing practices like, you know, price gouging and stuff like that. So as long as you have healthy competition, as long as you like antitrust them sufficiently, put in some consumer protections maybe. So like, you know, Uber, you have to, you know, your cars will have to be up to this standard if you want to have somebody on Uber, and you've got to make sure that they are up to this standard. They need to provide you the documentation. That documentation needs to be readily available for an audit. Then it's fine.
Welcome to
That actually works,
capitalism, baby.
Yeah, I
it
think the one
actually
thing that
works
Uber,
fine.
yeah, like the only thing Uber and Lyft is missing is like drivers who are certified. But you know what? The 2 times I've only been in a taxi 2 times in my fucking life because they're so goddamn expensive. Why would I ever use them except for in a fucking emergency or getting home from the stupid fucking airport? Like, but they weren't good drivers. The fuck? They were all over the fucking place. I distinctly remember those were shitty fucking rides. Like, what the fuck? I would have rated those shits 1 fucking star had I been in the fucking Uber. You know, tried
Well,
to
when
get
it
my
comes
fucking
to
money back because these
well, when
assholes
it
took
comes
my
to
fucking
Lesson
taxi
license
learned:
changer.
never
Like, what the
drive
fuck?
Jones.
well, when
ever.
it comes to taxi services, there's an easy, clear rating. It's called "I don't call that taxi service again."
But like, I don't think I've ever given an Uber a 1 star. I don't think I've ever had an Uber ride that I haven't given like 5 stars. I mean, I don't take that many. I've taken maybe 2 dozen.
One time I was coming home in a snowstorm, and the guy who was driving me, like in his taxi, was falling asleep. I literally had to wake him up multiple times as we were driving home.
One thing
Wild.
one thing that would be fantastic is allowing collective bargaining. Like I said, at the moment, Uber drivers not allowed to. It's a cartel. It's considered to be a cartel because they're not formally employed. Allowing them to collectively bargain is actually a good thing. And this is going to blow your mind. Actually, Amazon owns a platform for handymen, right? And Amazon actually has like a unionizing page where like the workers for this platform, or the contractor for this platform, can like vent their concerns and like tell them what they need to change, and they're actually quite good at responding to that. And that's an Amazon.
Wait. They basically have this platform, but they try to shut down every other thing. Like what?
Yeah, I know. It's gonna blow your mind. Amazon is actually like weirdly pro-union in like that one platform.
In one, they said they said we're getting one, but only as a treat.
Exactly. It's like like for some reason Amazon loves like handyman, and they're okay with them unionizing, but nobody else.
I mean,
that's what I mean. Like if Uber facilitated collective bargaining for its drivers, that would be a huge step forward. A huge step forward.
But
and like taking away from
companies,
this,
they're never going to do that.
oh yeah, no, but they should. That's what I mean. Like we should antitrust Uber and be like, right, Uber, you have to, you know, adhere to these restrictions. You have to make sure that the pay is equitable, you know, for like specific trips, like the cut is reasonable, and also you have to allow your workers to like vent their well, not your workers, your contractors, to vent their problems to you, and you have to, you know, make some efforts to respond to them to some degree, right? And like, you know, collective bargaining is complex.
So I want to, the time we have remaining, and after this, of course, we'll go to open walk-on panel. But for the time we have remaining, I want to talk about disruption and how much is okay. Like, so with introduction of these ride sharers, right? In the States, we've seen like a huge backlash from taxi drivers, right? Because what's happened. So the way it worked previously, to my understanding, if I'm getting any of this incorrect, someone please correct me, right? But to my understanding, with these taxi drivers, they had the medallion system. The medallion system basically helped limit the number of cars that were on the streets, which helped keep the prices up to like a certain standard. Uber and Lyft, again, not following these regulations, put a limited number of cars on the streets, and then it just drove the prices downwards, and just made it harder to get any jobs in particular, right? There's really stiff competition. The thing is, to get this medallion, right? This medallion is like this certificate that allows you to operate. Like, you have to, since there was a limited supply of those, you had to buy them, You had to buy a medallion, and the prices for those were crazy high, right? Like price of a house high, and or even higher than that, for some individuals, right? And they, for some drivers, taxi drivers, they actually like multiple people bought into a medallion because the prices are so high, right? So like there'll be 3 or 4 or 5 people who bought that medallion, and then they all like pass a taxi car in between them, because like it was a good investment that over time you would make that money back, and you would continue to have a good, like a middle class income through taxi driving. But then Uber happened, and the medallions, the price of medallions, I think, fell, and like, and people weren't making enough money to pay back like at the price that they bought into, and it resulted in some people thinking there's just no way out, and we had taxi drivers who have killed themselves, right? Like literally, and it's happened multiple times in front of New York City Hall. They one dude just ate a bullet.
This is actually an example why like healthy competition in markets is good for you. So like instead of having to buy these like ridiculous price medallions, if there was an alternative or a competitor that was saying, actually, you can come and work for us, you still have to adhere to like some consumer protections and worker protections and blah blah blah. You come and work for us, and our restrictions are just a little bit lower. It's just a bit easier to get in. Workers will do that, right? And that's beneficial to them. They can still get the job, they can still be paid, but they don't have to buy into this. And as a result, the company selling the medallions has to go, oh shit, we need to lower the price of the medallions, which is also beneficial for the people who want to get into that business, right? Like that is the market sorting itself out, and that is a good thing. Like healthy competition in a market is good for consumers and workers and businesses. Like the again, like much like I've been saying, like the problem with the gig economy is when they become predatory, is when they start engaging in these like horrible market practices, and like they fuck over like how the market is meant to work.
But
Yeah, and
that's
here's
not
another.
That's not what Prime's talking about, though. The medallions are a limited quantity, so there's only a certain amount of these cars that actually go. So if you have more drivers that want to drive on those specific medallions, you're effectively cutting the potential earnings of other drivers on those specific medallions. So there is no real competition other than people handing off medallions to other people.
And the
Yep.
medallion system with taxi cab drivers is incredibly stupid. It leads to inflated prices, and also it leads to this not enough drivers. There's not enough taxi drivers. That's why taxis suck. That's why nobody fucking takes a taxi, because they're so fucking expensive that it's unfeasible. You only do it in situations where you absolutely need to. Like that was the only situations that I ever took a taxi in the past. And I mean, Uber and Lyft, for all their what horribleness, they've also opened up like a whole new avenue. Like, not to bring up chat
Convenience,
or
quality of the drive, and price.
well,
Yeah.
like so, like not to bring up chat, but like somebody in chat, I'm not going to name them, but they rhyme with GSU Gambit, said that they used to drive drunk all the time before Uber. Guess what? That's me too. Holy fuck! I drove fucking drunk all the goddamn time home from the bar. It was horrible,
That's
fucking
not good.
horrible. And
That's not good
yeah,
at all.
oh, it
So
was
what you're
horrible.
telling
And
me is
and the only thing that stopped me was hitting something. Thank God it was a curb and not a person. And fucking breaking the axle on my truck. That's the only fucking thing that stopped me. And like, but
so,
and like eventually, that was the thing that taught me, like, yeah, actually taking an Uber home is definitely the way to go.
so what you're
Uh,
telling me is never, ever. What we should really do is pay you money so you don't drive.
Yeah.
Well, no, just don't get me drinking before I drive. I mean, like that's the real thing. No, I mean, because like I used to go home from the bar after a day's work, and I'd have had 4 or 5 drinks. I'm drunk. That's me drunk.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it is. It is. And guess what? Guess who hasn't done that since the age of fucking Uber and Lyft being a thing? I mean, I'm older than I look.
Hopefully you.
I know I'm older than I look, though. So like I've been driving for a long time, half my life at this point. So like this was a long time ago. So don't judge me too hard. People can change, okay? And I'm proof.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Can I delve into conspiracy just for a minute?
I do want to focus in on the thing, so just like quickly.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, 2011, Uber comes around. 2013, taxi medallions get implemented. Logical consistency? I think so.
No, the medallion system's been longer than 2015.
Medallion system's been around forever.
Yeah, forever.
That's like since the start. And here's the other thing about taxis. Taxis, fuck taxis, first of all. But second,
it's fine.
they have a monopoly on the fucking giving people a ride business. Like that's not cool. Why would we allow taxis to have this fucking monopoly? Fuck them and their yellow goddamn.
That's what I mean, right? Like the taxi company, like acting shitty and like limiting the supply of medallions, like fucking over the workers in that way by limiting the supply of medallions, like that's just them engaging in like shitty practices.
Company, the city only
the
gives
city
out
or whatever
so
it is,
many.
yeah. The city like doing that, like interfering in that way is just like fucking over the workers. Like
kind of like how we should limit the amount of Airbnbs that should be around, right?
I didn't say we should limit them. I said they should be harder to get access to.
Yeah, and we should increase the regulation to naturally get rid of them. That's not getting rid of them. That's regulating them out of the market.
Yeah, you can barriers to
do
entry.
it. Like you can do it if you can make that insane fucking jump. Like if you make that jump, honestly, you deserve to at this point. But that jump's gonna be high. Don't get me wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, and like oh my god, the taxi cab medallion system, it led to literally like people inflating the price of it, and then the new people who come in, they're like the fucking idiots who buy Bitcoin at 64,000, and then that shit fucking drops 50%, and they're stuck holding the bag on this investment that is no longer making them money, and they're fucked. It's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous system.
So,
whereas the way that Uber, anyway, let's get back.
It's not really as a result of the gig economy. It's just a result of like interfering in the market and fucking up.
No, but that's the point.
That's such a beautiful conservative take. I love it.
So
great. So,
is it okay? Okay, I guess I maybe what I'm asking, maybe a better way of asking is like, should we care about what happens to the taxi system?
No,
we shouldn't. Okay, that's interesting. So that like we see there is a problem. There are drivers literally killing themselves. There are drivers who are so deep in debt, and these medallions they bought into are fucking useless. In fact, now are an anchor around them, right?
Hashtag learn to code, man.
Wow. Okay. All right. So,
just move.
So let's do this. Move. Well, do you all think that this level of disruption is fine? Like, should we not actually care? Should we just say like, well, this is the car being introduced, and you're in the horse business, and you're out of luck? Is that what we should say, or
just abolish the medallions and antitrust Uber, and everything works out
until self-driving cars completely eradicate this
entire
industry.
That's exactly what I was about to.
Capitalist automation
is
something much scarier than any of this.
The problem comes with every roboticization, every automation. Like workers, like naturally find new ways of dealing with those issues. Right? It's like you automize, and you know what shit happens. Like transition to new jobs. They find new jobs, find new niches. It's like, as I understand it, the barrier to like the automation is like a little bit, but it's not that significant. So like shit gets automized over time, but like shit still gets done. So
capitalist automation is like a much scarier thing than just like taxi cab medallions. Like if like fucking like 10 people in the world are all the robots that make everything, we're fucked. Okay, we live in like a global monarchy at that point.
And also like let's not take away like that a lot of these market disruptions that have happened, like blacksmiths used to be a huge thing. You had to have a blacksmith in town because you needed your metal to be forged and shit by somebody. What the fuck? When was the last time you saw a blacksmith? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like these are things that have died out because they need to die out because fucking it's no longer efficient. It's totally inefficient to have that. Like there's no point to have a fucking a buggy, with a horse drawing it when you can have a fucking car.
I mean, like other than the fact that it would be insanely cool to watch a horse and buggy race down the highway at breakneck speeds, you're right about that, right? And I think that like Prime hits a point now. Like I'm glad I'm hearing some agreement on it. Yeah, like if we reach a level of efficiency that's better than what we have today, and we start to move on, like I'm sorry, like I hope y'all can like get your lives in order. I hope that our government makes sure that we're not just leaving you in the dust, and that's something I would want to fight for. But like we got to move on, be more efficient, bro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And how
Increase
we
the
deal with
welfare state, so when the automation does come, you can like help them transition to better jobs.
That's
Just make
exactly
it so we own the means of production, and then we don't have to worry about that, right?
da, da,
Bam.
da, da,
Fuck
oh.
yeah.
Bam.
Listen, you
I'm-
guys
I'm-
are worried about the robots taking the means of production. I'm worried about defending myself once the robots get like a crazy virus or some shit. Like that always happens.
I'm genuinely
Okay.
worried that like the capitalist class will just own all the robots and they won't have a need for workers anymore, and then the state will just continue to enforce their private ownership of the robots, and then that's it. We lose. That's game over. It's the end of the world.
Well, welcome to capitalism. We're all
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah, like, and I think like the big part about the automation driving possibly driving wages lower, et cetera, leading to like a dystopian future that needs to be addressed. Or if we could address that, then we address, I think, a lot of the issues that we're talking about in terms of the gig economy and people not making a living wage and people not being treated correctly. Like if we have Medicare for all, well then, the fact that you don't fucking get health insurance because you don't work, you're getting cut off at 29 and a half hours a week, or whatever it is, and that's not a factor anymore. So like there's a lot of things that we could do to alleviate some of the problems that aren't necessarily
I
getting
think the
rid of
more
these big
realistic
companies.
outcome here is that there's actually going to be an influx in gig workers, either through subcontracting, through small job tasks that aren't fit by a certain larger industry or company in the market, and I think that's more useful and something that we should help people learn more and get better educated and earn more skills rather than trying to keep them propped up driving for Uber. I think we need to help these people transition to higher skilled, higher value positions.
Well, you can do both, right? It's like
Yeah.
people still need transport. People still want that convenience.
I
But you
I
can
know, I
also
agree.
highly
find
disagree with
reasonable
that.
How
ways
Because
about
like,
this?
to help
How
them.
about
I
this?
highly disagree with that because I
just-
think that you can make there should be no shame in being an Uber driver or working in a restaurant or something like that. Like a lot of people just are not cut out to be
Yeah, but
fucking
you can
going up in society. Like I
Okay,
think of my own
Captain,
example. I
Captain,
used to work a ton of.
You can
Go
still
for
have
it.
both, right? You can have like free university, and like if you're an Uber
Yeah.
driver, you can like part-time drive Uber and go to free university. And if you don't want to do that, you just drive Uber and like fucking.
Yeah, and you should be,
Yeah,
and like, look, if you want to earn $15 an hour for the rest of your life, like that should be a choice that you could
Yeah,
like
I'm
not
okay
a
with that.
yes,
that we should be
like,
okay
I
with that,
agree.
and we shouldn't be
Yeah.
like I don't know. I just don't like this kind of. It feels like we're shaming people on the
Yeah,
lower
well,
end of
there
the education
there
spectrum.
is a problem that comes with like shaming people working menial jobs. I agree, but kind of circling to this the whole automation, capitalism, blah 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 thing. I do have a curious question. So when we talk about the workers, right, they're also the consumers, right? They're simultaneously producers and consumers. So the hypothesis I would ask then is like, if we think about it, right, there is some incentive, even if they're going to kind of like drive us into like a capitalist feudalist monarchy, there is some incentive to at least keep people involved in the workforce or provide some super specialization. No, because if you get rid of the consumer, you basically kind of like get
You
rid of
don't
your
need you don't
entire
need the consumer anymore,
economy.
right? You don't need the
mean, like-
consumer, right? So like the reason you have like consumers in like a conventional economy is to keep the economy going, right? Is to like keep things being produced because consumers want stuff. But if you're like the capitalist overlord and you own all the robots, what do you need consumers for? You just get the robots to make stuff for you. You don't need them.
But if no one buys
Get out of the
them,
equation.
you're gonna go bankrupt.
Yeah, but you don't need them, right? So you've got fucking robots that like farm for you and they make all your technology for
Okay,
you and
so,
stuff
like,
like that.
sneaky
right?
debate,
You're
man.
completely
But
self.
then-
That's a
Yeah,
shitty
Wait,
point.
wait, time out. Because, like, wait, I just want to make sure we're not getting into some wild territory, right? Like, are you insinuating that, like, if the people are like, you know what, no, we're not going to buy your product, that the evil capitalist Jeff Bezos is going to use his robot henchmen to hoard the resources, and then we get into some planet-wide resource war with
I'm saying,
Bezos and the robots.
I'm saying like at the moment, like the economy relies on like workers and consumers, right? And obviously workers consume in other industries. But if you take out the need for the worker, i.e. everything is automated, you also take out the need for the consumer, all right? And it's just whoever owns the robot, then just can do whatever they like.
No,
and if you
it
don't like
doesn't make
it,
sense.
really?
What you're saying actually doesn't make sense because
if you don't like it, too bad. My robots aren't dependent on you.
They divorce themselves from the economy. What you're saying is that, well, robots, like if there's 10 individuals, right, 10 super rich individuals who own all the robots, who do all this automation, right? Well, they don't need consumers anymore because they don't need to build things anymore because the robots will build things for them. And you don't have to pay them. So yeah, they can have everything provided for that super rich individual. But that means they've taken themselves out of the economy, right? And there are still people who want stuff, right? Who want to live. And so they will like, okay, well, we don't have any robots. We can't afford any robots, apparently. Only these 10 people can have those means. So why don't we still just do what we were doing before? Our businesses, everything stands. Like you've just removed rich people from the economy. Like that's the model you just
I guess they would be removed from the economy, but they would be removed from the economy, and they would own the things, right? And under like the private ownership framework, they would own like a bunch of land, a bunch of robots. That bunch of land and a bunch of robots would be enforced by the state, and they could just like constantly hoard resources.
That's what I just said, though.
And the thing that goes with what Prime was saying is farming. It has been heavily automated over time. Mass increases in productivity through those types of lands. But you know what? There's actually a really large market for smaller farms that do custom or niche types of products, and their farming practices are different. And you know what? People are still buying those smaller scale products because they like the type of farm that it is. They like the products that those types of farmers make, and they're able to be productive and satisfy that part of the market. That doesn't mean that automation is completely killed certain aspects. It's just the market.
All those resources.
Even in that situation, like it doesn't make sense what Spoon's saying, right? Like like hogging all the food. Why would you hog all the food? Like that's one thing that actually really does not make sense for the rich to do, right?
You can't,
Just think about it for a second. You hog all the corn. There's only so much corn that you can consume. You can't even save the corn, right? And so you will like what would be better to sell the corn.
That's what they kind of do with money, though.
No, but it's not the same. It's not the same because money is
so what you do, right? So now you've got.
Let me finish my point. Shut up. So yeah, money is not perishable. Corn, food is perishable, right? So there's no point in hogging on it, right? Like the only point of that commodity is to sell that commodity to buyers, right? And then so you get more wealth. So those two things aren't the same.
Okay.
So
right,
if the farming industry is completely automated, right? Like that doesn't mean that they're just going to hoard all the resources. Now you could see them hoarding land and then hoarding the means to work that land, and then like having not a monopoly but a oligopoly, right? And then raising prices up, but raising prices to sell to people. Otherwise, right, then they would just like make enough for themselves, right? And
that's the point, right? So at that point, you don't need to sell, right? So you've got this private ownership of everything you have is enforced by the state. So you've still got the monopoly of violence on your side. You don't need to sell these things anymore. You can just say, well, if you want some food, you have to do this for me. I now have all the political power in the world because I own literally everything. I don't rely on any of them to have any of that, right? I just gain things. I just own things that gain things, and I don't rely on anybody else to gain those things.
Luckily,
so now you will have to do what I say to
like they would.
I'm just gonna say it like this. Luckily,
everything, right? Like fuck the government. I'll just go to you. Like, oh, I broke the law. I'll do whatever you say if I could like live on your land and shit, and like you protect me with your robots and like just give me food, and I'll be like your surfer or whatever.
Indentured servant, an indentured servant, yeah. That's what you want. You'd be in like a little.
So like you just like what you're describing is
Welcome to Ancapistan.
Hold on. Think about
We
this
ended up
robot.
here.
How many
into a
different
monarchy.
parts does this robot,
Yeah.
these 10 robots have? Think about our current logistics chains and like
10
how
wrenches, not
products
robots.
get made. Like an iPhone has like a little product from here, another little product from there, another little thing from here, then it's all assembled in the US. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I'm having a really hard time envisioning what you're saying.
The reason they can't do this at the moment is
It
because
feels like the
they're still
Lord
relying on workers.
Farquaad version of like capitalism
Yeah.
gone
Wait.
awry.
But with
so, like-
robots, Lord Farquaad, but with robots.
Like, the reason we can't they can't do this at the moment is because like they still rely on workers to produce things, right? And the workers, if they get unhappy enough, they just stop producing things. Be like, man, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, we're gonna have a revolution or whatever. And that does happen occasionally, not very often, but it does happen. And that's why they can't do that at the moment. But if they remove the worker from the equation and they've still got like all the force on their side, we're fucked. We're fucked.
Well,
What
like
can we do?
I see
do
where
ha-
Captain Jones is coming from, though. Like that is a logical step, right? If they get to the winning stage, yes, they have won. But what about everything in between, like right now, and then like the winning stage of Lex Luthor and his robot army
Yeah, but
hoarding the food?
All right. I'm saying that this is like the logical conclusion of the path we're currently on.
No,
Well,
it's
and,
not.
like, I
no,
think-
Well,
it's
no,
not.
but like
No,
it's not. Like,
feel like-
hold on. Wait. Hold on. It's not the logical path because, like you just said, like there are instances where like the government gets involved, the people get involved. Shit just doesn't go right for these companies. At the very end is like
Pyro.
robot Lex Luthor shit. How are you going to say that? Like, there's not going to be
Pyro,
anything in
Pyro,
between that's going to
Pyro,
like disrupt
Pyro.
that.
Pyro. Right. This is like you would make the argument here. This is the logical endpoint of capitalism. It's like as a system, it designs and desires to control everything.
I think
If
that's
you're
such a
saying-
silly though. Like it's
No,
like in
hold
that
on,
one
hold on.
movie. What is
You're
it,
saying
Total
you're
Recall,
saying
where
if
Taco
what
Bell
you're
owns the
saying
world?
is right. I'm saying under this current system, this is the conclusion, and you're saying actually the system will change, and I'll be like, well, yes, if the system changes, then yes, the conclusion will be different. Like obviously, yes.
But
Okay,
the problem
so in the
comes is,
movie
like, we've seen-
Demolition Man,
wait. We've seen with like regulations imposed before, right? We had the regulations imposed. We did the antitrust laws, and you see what happens is we came to the same situation we are in 100 fucking years ago. It's the same problem. It's the same relationship. The system is ultimately designed to do this. It wants to maximize its control, maximize its profits, and eventually just control everything.
Yeah, okay. So that's like yes and no. Like, so ultimately, like what a company can do is corner the market on something. But what they can't really go beyond that. Think about Apple. What is their ultimate ambition, to rule the world? No, it's
What?
to
Sorry,
rule
hold on. Have you
the
not seen what
cell phone
Amazon is
world.
doing?
It's to
Amazon
have
is in everything.
every one
They're
of your
cornering the market in
devices.
everything. Amazon is
Not in
invested
video
in
game production.
literally fucking everything. Yeah, they're fucking getting
No, they're
into it. I
not
bet you.
though.
And
Are
No,
they
they're not.
producing? Are they
They're
producing
invested in a lot,
PCs?
but
Is
not
there like
everything.
Amazon brand cars? Like,
They've-
where's my
they're pretty
Amazon
sure-
Gucci?
Didn't they start
Exactly.
producing tablets?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they're
there's
fucking. They're going there,
there's
man.
a
They are
problem
fucking
with
going there.
companies getting too
Okay.
big and becoming over specialized in certain things, and that's where you start to see when companies take on too much scope, they start to collapse in on themselves.
Okay.
IBM has done
Well,
that.
when we're
HP has done that, and it goes back to what Jones is saying. It's like really successful companies hone in on a market that they're good at solving. And that's why Apple is really good at making consumer electronics. They
And
don't
also-
make server stuff.
Yes, and we're also not talking about an unfettered capitalistic free
Well,
market here.
here's
It's
a
not
great-
like
here's a great
going
example.
forward
Here's a
from here
great
on, we're
example.
never going to have any
Here's a
more
great
regulation
example.
on anything. You know, like I agree that Amazon is too fucking big. They got their hands on too many different types of businesses, and a lot of it needs to be broken up, especially like Amazon Web Services from the main fucking body
Here's
of what
a great
Amazon
example
warehousing and
of this.
logistics does to like deliver your fucking toothpaste to you in 2 days. You know what I mean? Like those are two separate companies that definitely should be split apart. But
Here is
like
a great example of this playing out in real time. Samsung in South Korea. Samsung in South Korea is 80% of their economy, right? You get born in a Samsung hospital, you go to a Samsung school, you work in a Samsung job, and you die in a Samsung care home. And then you get buried at a Samsung funeral service.
Well-
They own 80% of the economy in South Korea is Samsung. And they are in every fucking sector of the economy because
So, like-
More competition.
well, hold on.
God.
Because once you get specialized in one area of the economy, you go, well, we're doing really good in this. Time to branch out into something else. And then because you've got all the fucking power ramped up from that other thing that you're really good at, you get really good at that other thing as well. And then it makes it easier to
Turk,
get specialized.
you
in a
keep
third
shaking
thing.
That
your head, but
sucks for
that's
South
what's
Korea.
happening right now.
That's what's happening.
Like-
Samsung are literally doing that. Like I said, you get
Samsung,
born in a
Amazon,
fucking Samsung
Disney,
hospital.
they're trying to take over more and more, right?
Yes,
they're trying
that's
to, they're buying
literally
out
what's
other companies.
happening.
They're making mergers. This
All
is
right.
like the desire. Like as a capitalist, you want to maximize your profits. You want to make as much money and control
That's
as much of
literally
the
what's
market as you
happening.
want
It's
to,
happening
as
right
you
now.
can.
So
The only
let-
feasible way that prevents that is fucking government intervention.
Wait, did
And
this
they're basically
become
like,
a
well, if the
wait, wait,
government's
wait?
stopping us, and they're
I'd
like,
like to respond.
Did this become a capitalism debate?
I mean, I
Yes,
would like
sir.
to respond to what was actually said.
I'm scared of robot
So,
capitalism.
so in
Yeah,
South
so
Korea,
am I, but
so in South Korea, it's primarily run business economy by Samsung. I don't have the numbers, but I'll trust that what you're saying is correct.
I'm pretty sure it's not
Who
correct.
are the competitors in South Korea? How successful are the competitors?
But they're not, because Samsung can pressure them out of the market. That's the point.
No, and that's why we need better competition in
but
those
they
smaller
can't
sectors
compete.
to push
They
their.
can't. They can't, because Samsung can price gouge them. Samsung can fucking like corner them out of the market. Samsung can offer better services, more reliably,
Like-
more efficiently, with more workers, more of the time.
Yeah,
it's
like,
they
if
can't-
I
they can't
try-
Okay,
if I try and
I'm
release the
sorry.
pyro,
Yeah.
if I try and release the pyro phone, like I can do that, right? But it's gonna cost me a lot to
Yeah.
make that, and I'm gonna need to make a profit. So I'm gonna like charge you guys a little bit more. Samsung can look at the pyro phone and be like, "Cool, our phones are on sale for like the next half a year," and they will outsell me. And I will go
there's no
bankrupt.
way that Samsung controls 80% of the South Korean economy. There's like literally no way.
There's
Well,
just
then
no
look
way.
at it.
And first of all,
it's something
second
like
of all-
it's something really high.
and
It's-
second of all, even if I grant you that's South Korea's case, that's not America's case. So if you had said that this is hypothetical where you think like it's going to be like Demolition Man, where Taco Bell is going to be the only restaurant that you can go to, like if you said that happens in South Korea, maybe I could agree with you, but like I don't see that happening in America. We have a long history of breaking up companies. Like we don't do it well enough. We need to do it more. But we have definitely a better track record than it seems like South Korea is, at least.
and we
wait,
have-
wait, Captain,
we have-
can you ask me when was that done last time?
Well, it was probably before Glass-Steagall when it was broken up, but
Oh, great. That's
would've been
like
the
over
90s.
50 years ago.
that's 20 years ago. Don't make me feel older than I already am.
Wait,
Thank you.
no, wait. The Glass-Steagall Act was implemented like pretty sure in the 1950s.
Yeah, but when was it taken away? That's the
When was it taken away? It was like
in the 90s.
Reagan's time?
It was in the 90s. It was
Okay.
under Clinton.
But to go back
You're
to
too young. I was actually alive then.
I'm sorry,
I
Boomer.
mean, like, wait. If we're going to be going like, when did certain companies get broken up because like they were too big? Like, I just Googled it. Like, AT&T got broken up in
Oh, good point.
1974, like in an antitrust lawsuit based on complaints by the MCI and other long distance service providers that they had like too much control in the market. So like this is something that still does happen. I would agree if you're like it doesn't happen enough on the federal level where we might need it, but there are instances all over the countries where you might get a lawsuit against a cable provider because oh look at that, they're the only cable provider in the neighborhood. Like that happened against Spectrum in my area and stuff like that. Like it happens just on a smaller scale than we would like to see it. In that case,
but the
I would
problem,
love to see it on a big scale.
but the problem,
And also
comes is,
mergers
like,
get
the
broken
smaller-
up and shit. It happens all the time.
The problem comes though is like when you look at like in terms of like companies like AT&T, Verizon, all that shit, right? Is like you don't have to have a full on monopoly. You can have a pretty effective oligopoly, like kind of like the entire like cable network series, right? They're like, okay, we all agree that we're going to kind of like work together to kind of like produce a better outcome for all of us. And like you literally look at like the whole net neutrality thing that happened like a couple years back.
Oh,
like,
Wordy, if
pretty-
you want to argue that the system we have now is really fucking dog shit, I will agree with you 100%, but it's not a fucking monopoly. Like,
and then you
there
also
are legislations that like take care of this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And then you also look at there's other competition coming on the market, such as live streaming services that have caught all of these cable providers completely off guard, and they're losing a lot of people in their subscriptions, and they're losing their market cap because of that. So
I don't know the last
that's
time
why
I
we
watched
need
cable.
healthy competition in order to provide a market that is fruitful for both the companies and the consumers.
Yeah, and like and yes, there is so many areas where you do not have a choice. You have to get AT&T, you have to get Comcast, but that's not necessarily a lack of competition that's making that happen. You might just be in a fucking kind of like out in the middle of nowhere area. Like I used to live out in the middle of nowhere where there was only one fucking provider was out there.
So hold
Like,
on. So
My definition of
terms of-
cable might be
in
different than
terms
what y'all
of-
are talking about then.
let's look at the
Super
streaming market. Were things better for the consumer when it was just Netflix or when others entered into it, right? So like when Netflix first
Better
came
for-
into the market, like the other companies literally did not know what to do with it, right? They're like, oh, streaming rights? What's this, right? You want to
Not
stream?
necessarily true.
No, that's exactly what happened. So
No, because
hold on,
Blockbuster
oh
actually
my
had-
god, let me finish my point.
Didn't
So
Blockbuster-
let me finish. So when they first came into the market, like distributors, right, and rights holders literally did not understand what was happening, and so Netflix bought up a whole bunch of properties, a ton of them, right, all at once, and then they had like an amazing service, right, and then afterwards, belatedly, everyone's like, oh shit, like there's money to be made here, lots of money to be made here apparently, oh crap, and so they decided to enter in the market, and then they started to jack up the prices of their IPs, for the stream rights in particular, but during this time, during that sweet period, like customers had access to a vast library of intellectual property for basically fucking nothing. For that monopoly gave us fucking everything. And now that more have entered into the market, well, now there's like bidding wars for that property, and streaming services, they're upping their prices, and then to find the specific like franchise or like movie or TV TV series that you want to watch, it might be on a different service than you have, right? So to actually get the things that you want, you end up paying more for the original service, and then more because you have to get to an additional service because the thing you want is not on like CBS, like fucking Paramount, right? Like CBS has like their Paramount Plus thing, which was before CBS Plus. I don't know, it's really dumb.
I was
Because-
just thinking Disney Plus, like
No. Disney Plus has value to it, but CBS, no, it doesn't. Paramount
value.
Plus, it
listen,
does.
I'm not talking
But,
about
like-
in terms of
but like,
shows and
why?
whatnot, but like
No. Let me finish my point. I'm almost done.
Okay.
But like, why would I pay for Paramount's old ass library? Like a separate service for old ass library, and the few shows that they're piddling out. When if all that had been on Netflix, like their entire CBS and Viacom's entire library had been on Netflix, and any of their shows like they licensed through them, right? Like the new Star Trek shows licensed to them. But for me as a consumer, that's actually better. Wouldn't you agree?
So I disagree
I don't
completely
like
with the
this.
premise of.
if there's a complete,
Hold on.
sorry, go ahead.
Hold on, I'm sorry. I disagree with the
Don't you
entire
dare
premise.
steal my point, though.
Oh, I'll try not to. Like, I actually think that when
will.
Netflix first came out, it was pretty dog shit. It didn't have nearly as much content as we all remember it having until we watched it all, and then we were like, nah, now it doesn't have any content. But what happened is that we spent 10 years on Netflix and we watched it all. And I think what you're also forgetting, Prime, is that back then, not that I would ever steal content now, because I never would. I actually don't. I don't steal content, and I wouldn't advocate
None of
or
us
anything.
has ever done it and never would, and we would report anyone who did.
Exactly.
Go
You're a
ahead.
streamer. You steal content all the time.
I
No,
literally
watching
don't
somebody
do
else's
that.
YouTube video is not the
Fair
same.
use.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
But like, I think back in the day, pirating was just tremendously easier. Oh my god, I remember. Like back in the day, it was just a lot easier to do that.
You heard this
and
was
so
the
when
case.
Netflix first came out, it was cheap because like it had to contend with free. It had to contend with really easy free.
It had to contend with
now-
fucking Blockbuster.
Yeah, and that's the point.
And,
So
and now it's like it's a whole new fucking world where it's really hard to actually get like high quality pirated stuff, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that people can protect their intellectual rights better and actually at least get some ad revenue from that
Whose
shit.
intellectual rights are being protected? The companies or the
Oh,
actual
God.
producer?
Well, that's
So, like,
a different.
To your point, Prime, like I think like I see where you're coming from. Like when Netflix first came out, right? It was revolutionary, like having cable and having to wait for my shows versus like, yo, I can just like stream it. Or if I want to, in the early days of Netflix, when they were like beating out Blockbuster and shit, I can order whatever the fuck I want to my house and they'll deliver me. I don't have to go to Blockbuster. I don't have to deal with any of that shit. That was really revolutionary. And they did get a bit of a monopoly because everyone wanted their shows on these platforms so they could hopefully maybe bring motherfuckers back to the cable. Like, oh, I remember Disney doing this with like Jessica Jones and like all their shows and whatnot, and like the CBS shows. And then the people caught on, like you said, they realized, oh, this actually brings money. So like, let me make my own service and whatnot, and we'll do it all like that. And like, it's terrible like that. I have to pay like $30 for like 3 shows that I want to watch or some shit like that. But like, my other option is cable.
And let's all remember the days before Spotify and before Apple Music. Nobody paid for music. Nobody paid for music. I wouldn't dare have paid for music. Now I pay for all my music.
So
I
but,
will say,
but what's happening
I
now,
love seeing leftists advocate for monopoly.
What's happening
It's
now?
not a monopoly.
Spotify is not a monopoly.
It's literally not a monopoly. When Netflix is competing with like CBS, Nickelodeon,
ancestors
like
were
all of
Netflix
these
has
fucking,
healthy
it's not a
competition.
monopoly. If you want to call,
But like the problem is that like, and people, lots of people may know of this, is that the streaming landscape is becoming a lot like cable. So people are talking about cord cutters who are getting away from like the bullshit oligopoly cable companies, and moving on to like cheaper, greener pastures on the internet. But because everyone's breaking through, like it seems like to get like a full accounting of shows, like you're just creating cable, and then someone is waiting for like a bundling of streaming services, and Disney's actually probably the first one to do it. Bundling streaming services. Now they have the Disney Plus, Hulu, ESPN, right?
So the difference between
Sorry.
So the difference between the cable providers and their them making the channel lists that you wanted to get, and let's say you don't want Food Network or you don't want Cartoon Network, you only want CNN and all the news stuff. Well, they didn't provide you that option, and unfortunately the market wasn't happy with that solution, and unfortunately they just did it. But now there is options aplenty of different types of content you can get. And sure, yes, you might have to go to 4 or 5 different services to get the content you're wanting to have. But as a consumer, you have the option. If you don't want to watch that show anymore, you no longer have to pay for it anymore. You can drop the service. And if the other service picks it up, or if there's a different type of show that's similar and you think that'd be a better option, as a consumer, you have more options. And that's why people have dropped cable, yet still pay similar costs to their subscriptions, because they're getting what they
better
want.
option.
I agree.
But let's please not forget the real reason that we all dropped cable. It's because once Netflix came out, holy shit, we could actually pick what we wanted.
No,
I'm not at the fucking whim of the goddamn
Captain Jones.
the channel that I'm on. How
I'll
whack was
actually-
that?
I'll
You
actually-
remember? You had
not
to
like
wait for stuff
Hold
to
on,
come on.
wait, Captain Jones.
You had to hold on. No,
Wait,
this is a good
hold
point.
on. It's not like when I dropped cable, it wasn't because I had to wait for my shows. It's because I didn't want to pay $50.99 for
That's all
one
you were paying?
goddamn
What the
channel
fuck?
for a package. If a package of channels, and that was like the
Dude,
cheap on sale option. I'm not gonna pay like $50-$60 because I want to watch one show on one channel. I'll do what the Turk just said. Like, I'll go and buy some fucking package and be like, you know what? I'm watching Doctor Who on BBC Plus or whatever the fuck they got.
My point is
I like
that,
the
is that you
BBC.
can get a ton of
BBC's
content
good.
on a cable service. You can get a lot of different channels. You can pay for the individual channels, super customize your cable service to make it so like, oh, now I got only the channels. But still, why is that still dying? Why is cable still dying when the competition? It's because the competition is I get to watch whatever the fuck I want anytime I want, rather than I'm waiting.
No, it's not.
It
That's
was
not
literally
true.
waiting on a channel.
It was cheaper.
Nobody
No,
wants
time
to
out.
be
Wait,
streaming.
hold on.
It's all
Wordy,
those
hold on.
things. Why has
That's
it gotta
not
be one
true.
thing?
Like,
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's both.
exactly. It's
for the
all of
most
those
part.
things. It's also because it's cheaper. But like, I didn't not get cable because I wasn't missing anything by not getting cable. What was I missing? I could get everything I wanted with YouTube, Netflix. You add on to that Hulu, Spotify. You know what I mean?
Like,
these
if all you
services have
watch,
made it so that I don't like. I'm paying maybe $40 a month for everything, and that's like fucking a quarter of what.
if you watch shows on like cable by season, and like that's how you were looking them up, I will agree with you, right? The ability to binge is one of the big reasons I went to Netflix. However, we're seeing this now with Disney Plus and all their Marvel shit. They're going right back to the episodic cable nature. And you know what? I'll still stick to that because cable, I don't like having to pay a lump price for all of the packages to the company when I want to specifically watch certain shows and whatnot. I'll pay the $11.99 or whatever Disney is for like, you know, Marvel's What If and all the fucking
What
extra
they've
shows
started-
and whatnot.
And to go back
Well-
to the original conversation of backing gig workers, thanks to the platform known as YouTube, you can actually go and support some of your fellow creators that make really cool content. There's some like the Game Historian. He does a bunch of videos about
Your
know,
boy
old
PrimeCayes
consoles.
is on YouTube.
Yeah,
Like,
you can subscribe and give money to people that are making content directly, and you don't have to go and pay Paramount for their subscription service or CBS's. I think it's NBC's Peacock, right? You can actually go and find the content you want to watch and actually provide substantial support towards people that are
unless I want to watch like actual cable shows, because then like they get that shit taken off of
I mean,
YouTube almost immediately.
What subscription services are doing now though is like, for example, with like the Mandalorian, right? They had all the episodes
Episodic.
filmed. They had all of them, but they would release them every 2 weeks. So you stayed subscribed for 6 months if you wanted to watch
It's
the whole
literally
series.
just episodic. Every time they do like the what ifs, and it's like next week on what if Doctor Strange was evil? They're like, yeah, come back next Wednesday, punk.
Yeah,
Because you
yeah,
know you
have-
want to
and you
see
have
what
to pay-
happens.
And you have
Doctor
to
Strange
pay.
is evil now?
Yes,
have to
there was
pay,
oh god,
right?
there was one. He was like he was a complete stupid idiot. Like
It's
it
the
was
what
amazing.
if. It's the what if Marvel stuff. The what if
I
Marvel
think he
stuff
knows.
is so
I think
fucking
he
good.
knows. He's
You
just
know, it's
fucking-
literally I just said like that's the
I was
title.
memeing.
What
I was
if?
memeing.
Yeah,
I was
Yeah.
memeing, guys.
Yeah, the point is like that they keep you like reeled in, right? It's like it's a what's it called? It's called the foot in the door technique, right? If you can get them to pay like one subscription, like you probably get them to pay two if you know they watch a show and they like it, and like and at the end of the day you end up paying them like way more than you would have otherwise because
So-
they've sort of like trick you into it.
So I think Disney actually, what they experienced in their foray into Disney Plus and the streaming market so far is that when they released The Mandalorian and Disney Plus, their subscribers went up. After The Mandalorian went away and everybody had watched it, they plummeted again. And people like myself fucking got rid of that shit. Why would I watch? What am I going to watch the fucking prequels over and over
Well,
again? What the fuck were
that's
they
the thing,
offering
right?
me? They weren't
That's the
offering me shit. They had to provide a value add to me as the consumer in order for me to re-up on their service.
Well, that's the thing. They're
so,
doing like cable that makes it really shitty with these streaming services, right? They noticed that 100%. They noticed everything you just said. And now they have all of these Marvel shows, and they're like, okay, you know, WandaVision just ended, so wait a little bit, and you get Loki. Or if you're not into that, they have a plethora of other properties that they own that they could release at the same time. So they're not just banking on, you know, The Mandalorian. They'll also be banking on the Marvel Sims who want to like continuously keep up with the timelines and shit, no matter how convoluted. They'll keep up with like everything else and whatnot too. And like they'll release content on a cycle. So it's like if the Mandalorian goes down, we're boosting more Marvel shit right now. And if Marvel shit goes down, we'll boost Star Wars or make something new with Star Wars. And they'll release it exclusively on these platforms.
Sounds like exactly what we want as consumers. Fucking
Yeah, and
endless
it-
content, baby. Just
mean,
keep
yeah,
that
no,
content
like-
mill
And it
going.
forces other competition to make other types of content that is like, okay, Mandalorian was good. Let's make something similar that is better, and let's see if we can get some of their subs out of it. And that's
I
why
will say that's true.
we get
yeah.
options, and having options
Yeah.
is best.
I think the
no,
content game today is better than it's ever fucking
Yeah,
been.
I
I think
think that
there's
is
more
true.
content, better content than ever, and it's
You
fucking
used to
right
go
at your
to
Some really
fingertips.
good shows.
HBO
Really
to
good
get
Right at your
shows on there.
fingertips
TV
for
shows.
fucking cents a day. Like we're paying like 50-30 cents a day, something like for these services. It's so cheap, so great.
Like, when-
I will say is if you want to go with the actual meme, I would say is like, you know, every masterpiece has its cheap replica of its cheap replica of its cheap replica of its cheap replica. I would say to some extent the content game kind of like suffers from that a little bit. It's like you see like big things like Mandalorian come out, or even like things like if we talk about video games a little bit, you talk about CD Projekt Red and all these different stuff. Is like the problem comes is like there's this financial incentive to kind of like capitalize on that energy, like the desire for that type of content.
I
But then
think,
they're
I
like
think
they push it too fast,
That's
and
a
they
natural. That's a
Yeah, but
natural.
I think-
man.
I think content, like
Sounds like a great
generally
problem.
speaking, has actually gotten like quite significantly better of late.
It
Like,
has.
Yeah.
like for example,
Like,
like God of War was like it was amazing,
Holy shit,
right?
so
And they only
good.
made that
Yeah,
as a big middle finger to Xbox, right? Like,
Yeah.
and like,
Like-
it works. It was really
And,
good.
like, when we're talking about derivatives and stuff, like what you just described, Wardy, has literally always been the case, right? When one thing becomes super popular and like people want to emulate that content, then you see like everyone trying to copy Marvel in the way they shoot their movies or like the superhero genre. That like when you see mockbusters, right? You go in the store and you see like Transmorphers. It's like Transformers, but produced by sci-fi. Yeah, they're capitalizing on that content. Right now, I would agree that like content's getting better because since we have all of this content at our fingertips, I can look at all of the half-bakes and
It's the
mock-ups and be
competition.
like I don't like this. And then like you get that one really good version that's like, oh, this is a ripoff of something I really like, but it's better, and I'll watch that. That's what I did with Loki. It's literally
It
just
is the
good Doctor
competition.
Who. Like
It
It's just
also
like the
drives. It also drives innovation in the film space. It gets a lot of actors who we fucking would have never fucking heard of hired
it,
into roles, and
more
fucking
than actors,
it gets a
producers,
lot more
SFX
jobs into this.
artists.
It makes it cheaper to produce shows and movies and shit. It gets it makes the funding easier to get. I mean, there's just so
That's not
many.
Like,
necessarily
well, one of
true.
the no, it is like one of the
It
things
is.
I
Like,
liked.
these things-
One of the things, hold up. One of the things I liked seeing over like the later half of the 21st century is like as shit began moving more online. The fan channels I'd see producing like bang up job fan animations and shit started getting hired. Doctor Who, for example, I know I keep using that one. In like 2017, 2018, they went to a fan VFX artist and said, "Yo, design the new title sequence for the next 4 years." And like, yeah, people get jobs off of this because like now people have their eyes on the internet now. Now they realize like, oh shit, I can make money off of this. People have really good skills that they are willing to be like, yo, please give me a job and I'll work for anything.
Well, if you
People
think
get
about the
jobs.
content industry in general, it's grown
Yeah.
exponentially, it just service industry. We as
Well,
Americans, especially, we are demanding more. We want more content. We want more services. We want more stuff. You know what I mean?
And
And
I
like
well,
it all goes hand in hand, and content is no different. And
I
like it's just
I
expanded the amount of jobs in the content industry
and
because
like
you need
we
I would
want
roadies,
better
I would
you need all the
content.
people to carry the shit from here to
I
there, etc.
I
Those
I
are
would
gig
make the
workers, by the way.
I would
To tie
I
it
would
all
make
back
the
in.
argument I would make the argument that as a whole, content market's great, right? But the problem comes is when you look into like these streaming platforms, there seems to be a lot of quantity, but the problem comes is like this is like kind of the I think the general trend is the amount of quality. And kind of like that financial motive, I think, kind of often drives to accept more quantity at the cost of quality, and that's the concern I would have in terms of
I-
content itself.
So
I mean,
so I actually think-
we've seen the response to this too. Like if we're like equating the Twitch sphere and like streaming services to like big movie industries, people with the best quality and the best actual quantity or whatever, they usually get the best, right? We got our Destinies and our Voshes that release videos on like a regular, and regardless of their politics, which you may not agree with, they have really good quality streams, right? Like when it comes to what we watch and shit, like the quality aspect is there, but people will kind of gravitate
Yeah,
shit that
I
has
think
more
it
quality.
is. I think they gravitate to quality over quality. Yeah,
Yeah.
like people, like I said, people will
Uh,
buy Disney Plus for like 3 months just to watch The Mandalorian.
I mean,
right?
like
It's not all the other crap on
if we're
there.
talking
It
about
is for the
streamers,
quality
put it
content.
like this: if someone releases like a half-baked video essay that has choppy fucking audio, bad cinematography and shit, and it's on a subject you really like, I could watch that, yeah, but I'm gonna watch the person who has like better fucking shit for me to watch. Anything that's easier on all of my senses. And they
wait.
may take a minute to upload. I'm cool with that.
You're now
Okay.
confounding two
So-
types of quality.
Yeah, and I also
Yeah,
think
yeah.
like
I would make
I think like the fact that we have more quantity of content is actually kind of a quality in and of itself. Not to go all
not
Napoleon, but like
necessarily.
Well, I
I
would
think
ask
so
like,
because
no,
I
so,
think
like,
like a lot of the
to
hidden
drag it
gems
back,
out
like,
there,
what type
they
of
come from
quality
like
are we talking though? Like
I
that's
don't
the question.
disagree.
I
I don't
well, like
disagree.
I,
Like
I
I,
would
quality
I'm
of
thinking of
service.
like Hulu. Hulu has a lot
Like-
of fucking shows on there that nobody's fucking heard of
Like,
and
it's-
shit.
it's-
But like
it's
I
the
don't know. I like to
quality-
go through and watch stupid shows. And like whether no matter what the streaming service it's on, like
It's
a
the
lot of
quality
these
of the
smaller
service,
shows
right?
are the hidden gems.
Well, like that's what I want to figure out. Is it the quality of the service and how it looks and how it's presented and all that shit, or is it the quality of like what's actually being presented to us? Like, is it the
yeah,
quality
that's
of?
what I would make the
So, I
argument
wanna-
is like it's the quality of
I
what's being
want
presented.
Spoon,
So like
Spoon and Turk. There's been I just want to make sure they get in.
But so it is like when I say quality of the service, like so for example, having multiple options is like a quality of the service. This is like a good feature of the service, right? This is like something that makes it like better than other services, having multiple things to watch. So like, yeah, I think Jones is right. Like having like not just good things to watch, but just loads of things to watch is also attractive.
Because like, oh my god, I don't know. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, and just maybe this just speaks to how much fucking shit I watch all day. But like, I'm watching shit all fucking day. Like, holy shit, I run out of shit to watch on YouTube. Motherfucking thing has like billion fucking videos, and I'm running out of shit to watch. I don't know. The recommended's not doing its job or something.
To be fair,
like,
those numbers are heavily artificially increased because of all the other international videos and stuff. So
and like I don't know.
That's a better example. With cable, I would not be able to watch foreign TV shows, right? Like I love being able to do that on the internet. Like BBC cable packages. If I want strictly BBC, which is like Brits, that's a fucking ridiculous amount for 4 extra channels I'm never going to watch. Meanwhile, I got BBC iPlayer up here. I can watch all of the episodes I want of any show that's made in like England and shit that they have. And that's better for me. That's an extreme quality function over like cable in the old way.
Or like some of these European shows, like the new War of the Worlds.
That's banger.
French.
That's a
fucking banger. And that's
Yo.
you wouldn't fucking see that. Like I don't know. I love the content world nowadays, man.
Yeah, like
Problem
everything
comes is like every time you like bring up like a good thing, I can point to plenty of like popular negative things, or like things that kind of like, or like not necessarily popular, but like get really advertised and get really like a lot of like media attention, and they just come out shit, right? It's like the problem comes for me is like commodification and quality of product is like those kind of relationships kind of pretty well exist. Like when we look at like production of different manufactured goods, it's just like as a whole, like it's good to have more access to these quantity of things, but the problem comes is when you access to quantity, you often come at a cost of quality.
Is that the
And
case?
this
You
is
keep
kind of the
saying,
same
you keep
problem that we're
asserting
dealing
that, but you keep asserting
I think
that.
that's the
Yeah.
case. I think that's the case for
That is the
literally
case.
everything on the internet, right? I can find any online shop I want and buy, a new pair of industrial scissors, right? But if I buy from the wrong shop and they advertise me something that's better than what I get, I get really shit quality.
No,
Everything
that's not
on
the
the
same.
internet.
That's not the same. Hold on. No, this doesn't make sense. No, like when you're talking about quantity versus quality, like you have to look at one producer, right, who is making a ton of stuff, right, and then sacrificing the quality of each individual item for the quantity, right? So like comparing two different producers, and which we get from there, that doesn't make any sense for this paradigm. So like. And going back to these shows, right? Like, it depends on like how you are judging quality, and I think Spoon had it right.
I want to speak to that too.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll go to you next then. I think Spoon was speaking to that right. One, having so much, right? So like what Netflix's strategy is to throw everything at the wall, right, and to see what sticks. Right? Just keep throwing at things at the wall. And there are sleeper hits that Netflix itself does not expect. And they'll just like put it out there and, oh shit, everyone's talking about this thing. This is great. Let's order more seasons. Like that's just kind of how it goes. But that doesn't mean that all the other things that they are putting out, are necessarily bad quality, right? They're simply funding everything. That's all they're doing. They're just kind of funding everything. And then because they have so much choice, right? Because there's so much quantity, that there's something for everyone, right? You can be overwhelmed by your choices and then not actually watch anything. But like there is something there on Netflix right now for you that you would love, for every audience. And I mean, even international audiences, everyone. So like to say that, like to keep asserting that because we're having so much of these shows that necessarily everything else is decreasing. No. And then again, the bangers after bangers we get out from all the, well, not from all of them, for all these, because CBS All Access
Most of them.
and Paramount Plus is a thing. But for just about everyone else,
Most of them.
we are getting huge. Now, if you look at them compared to like the total amount of shows that come out, right? Like then like the ratio is like way off. But still, other people do watch those shows. There are fans who love that stuff, even if you aren't watching it. So to say that it necessarily decreases the quality, I reject that. But
okay,
Turk,
so like
Turk.
Yeah, so there's two different types of quality that go into this conversation, and I want to kind of bring it back to the contract workers gig. So quality is like what the actual content is. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it delivered correctly? And I think that's what Pyro is trying to talk about a little bit, in that certain people or certain groups are producing some pretty creative stuff that is good. It doesn't mean that the quality is good or that the visual delivery of it is good or the how often it's being delivered is good,
The
but like
acting might not
what's
be
the
good.
content inside the content is good. But I'm more concerned, and what's probably more applicable for these bigger companies is production quality. And sure, Tiger King, it came off as a pretty big hit. The production quality wasn't great, but it was one of those sleeper hits that just got flung at the wall, and it happened to be okay. But then you look at like Disney Plus, and it's like these almost triple A movies in like TV form. And then going to counter what Jones said, production costs have shot through the roof. Now that things are at a certain bare minimum to be considered good quality from a production perspective, you have to have all these different teams of subcontracted companies, riggers, all the different people. And it's like, we do need more of that across the industry, and that goes towards creators hiring producers, writers, and all that stuff. But it's like we do need to have more leniency when it comes to quality regardless, and I think that's where we're kind of getting confused in this conversation.
Wordy.
Unless
Uh,
Sneaky's gonna get in, I would like to.
Yeah,
respond.
So basically, if we look let's hone in on Disney Marvel, right? Is we look at all the movies, look at all the TV shows, and they throw a lot of shit out to see what catches, right? They go Agents of Shield. No, they do. All these different TV shows.
They're doing the opposite
Yeah.
strategy. Disney is not
They're
doing the same
honing
thing.
on what they have,
No.
like Star Wars with the Mandalorian. Marvel, you want to bring up Marvel? They're literally only doing Marvel shows and everything in that
No.
universe with the properties they own.
Because
Like,
most of the Star Wars stuff is still in pipeline and getting shot. They've got Obi-Wan they want to do. There's a couple other prequel ones they want to do. So it's like
when we
there's a
talk about
production
throwing
schedule.
when we talk about throwing shit to the wall like Netflix does, Netflix will literally take everything in their arsenal. They might even ask people to borrow their shit and they'll throw it all. So not only will you get Tiger King, you'll get Dragon
so-
Prince, you'll get all these other
Netflix
shows and
invents
like
new IPs. That's it,
Yeah.
right? Netflix
Okay.
invents new IPs, whereas Disney just capitalizes on like the already popular IPs that they have.
I was using specific an example, sticking to that example. So we look at like all these different TV shows they've employed. We look at all these different movies. Like the comparison is like this whole argument of quality, right? There's a lot of criticisms around like all the different movies that come around, like Thor's different movies, comparison to Ragnarok, and you talk about like Iron Man movies, basically the problem comes is like with the pure amount that they're producing, and they're producing on a consistent timeline. The problem comes is that when you're trying to produce so much, there's a risk, and I say it's fine risk to have, but like the amount that they're actually good compared to like how much like audience approves of them in comparison, just other than just going to view them because it's a brand. And I think that's the issue here.
No, it has nothing to do with has nothing to do with how much they're pushing out. Like if you can say the same thing about movies like with sequels and shit. Yeah, like Jurassic Park. If they keep pushing out sequels, some of them might be bad. And if we're comparing it only in the Jurassic Park franchise, I can compare the quality, but like the franchise as a whole, like it's not that bad.
Shit, no. I reject everything that Wordy keeps saying, because you keep using the different words to say the exact same thing. Well, is that like the quality might decrease? Shang-Chi is a 25th movie within a franchise, right? The 25th sequel. The 25th.
It was quite good, actually. It was quite a good film.
It was amazing.
It's amazing.
It's
fucking amazing. This latest Marvel shit is amazing. And you know what?
Yeah. Let me finish. Yeah,
I expected it to be bad, but it was good.
Yeah, it was
I'll let Prime finish.
It was actually extremely good.
And
so I read this in an article, but like if you go back 2 decades, right, and say that, oh yeah, we're gonna have a 25th movie in a franchise, right? That'd be a punchline, right? Like, oh, ha ha ha, like look, because Hollywood can't come up with new ideas. This is. Like they keep pumping out sequel after sequel, right? And so yeah, 25th movie in a franchise, ha 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 ha, right?
It was a fucking gut punch when they did Harry Potter with the 7th.
But yeah, exactly. But now we have 25th of a juggernaut, of the MCU juggernaut that is simply not slowing down. Not even a little bit, right? Like we have $1 billion movies after $1 billion movies coming out. So just looking at them, if you want to focus on that, then just look at the MCU, and you can say that different movies have different quality, but like that's true for fucking anything. Anything that
Yeah.
a studio produces will have different amounts of quality, right? You'll have hits and you'll have misses, right? You'll have something that better than another. But actually, for Marvel, they actually have a consistent quality, a consistent, like none of their movies. There's some like I don't like Thor, like the second the Dark
Iron
Elves
Man.
bullshit, right? Yeah, that was like not great. But even then, it's a perfectly serviceable movie. There's like they have a minimum standard of quality that they've been able to maintain the entire time. 25 movies in a franchise plus the spin-offs, like in terms of in other media. Like there is
So, like,
nothing that compares to it. So I don't see. So
I
you
think
keep
when it
asserting that like quality disappears, and I don't see it.
I
So
think what Wordy's describing is like how like, when it comes to like longevity, right? You're gonna be able to compare more hits to more misses, right? Like we look at TV series that's been on for like 30 years, like The Simpsons. Like people will argue that it's still good. Can you count all of the misses they've had over what 30 plus year? Right. When we compare it to movies, like Prime's saying, 25 movies. I may be able to count out a handful of bad ones, but over 25 movies, and we're just ignoring the TV shows. Most of them are hits. Most of them are consistent hits. With The Simpsons, like they may have had bad runs, but for some reason they're making enough money to stay on the fucking air. So
I would
like,
also, and like, so, and I don't want to dogpile Wordy, but
It's
but
fine. I'm
but
used
let
to
me
it. I'm
let
used to it.
me dogpile Wordy a little bit. Like so no, actually, to respond to Turk, and production costs have gone up for high end stuff, for high end content. Yes, of course. Like it costs a lot to have graphics that are like A plus fucking graphics that could be in like a movie like the ones y'all are describing with Marvel. But like the amount it costs to make content nowadays is super cheap. Everyone can do it, but we can
Based
all make content, and it'd be pretty fucking good quality if we put the time and effort into it ourselves to do it. You know, like I guess that's what I was really trying to say, and like that's like the explosion of YouTube content, and that's why I'm, but
that's fair.
so yeah, and so anyway, just to push back a little and
Yeah,
defend
but
my honor.
that's fine. And
Okay,
but that's
Zuko,
where we got
calm
to keep
down.
in mind the where it's being put, right? So if you were to put Vosh's videos, I don't like Vosh, but whatever. If you were to put that on Netflix, would that quality fit that platform?
No.
Okay, and that's
No.
my point. If you're going to be on those types of platforms, your quality level is X, and you got to be at this certain level. So it's like I completely agree with you, and I think we're good.
Oh yeah, and like, and I totally agree with like what you just said, and that's why I think like Netflix has totally changed the game up for content, like high quality content creation, because they're able to just invest and
Yeah.
and do like just well, I don't know if this is gonna work or not, but fuck it, here's some movie for this French flick about a fucking plane that's surviving the apocalypse. That shit was dope. That shit was.
I know
fucking
exactly.
dope.
The fact is
Yeah, I
that I
don't know
know
what it was
what
called, but it
movie.
was
I
good.
know what movie
Yes.
you're talking about, right? One of the movies I loved is like this movie where they're trying to like move Earth. It's a Chinese movie, and they're trying to move Earth out of the way of Jupiter because some shit goes wrong, and Jupiter's on this crash course. It's a fucking banger. I would not be able to do that without like some of my streaming services.
So
I like
and
that.
just yeah, and companies with the capital to throw money, or with like the potential capital, because often they're not throwing money before the movie is made. They're throwing money at this content after it's made, and they're like, well, you know what, this is, you actually did good, but that makes it easier for the initial investment to be made, because they're like, well, there's a chance that this could get picked up by Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, etc. So it makes the whole process easier, even downstream.
I think it's a double-edged sword,
I
though.
would just say, now let's go. I think our friend Joe, the solicitorist, has a different opinion on that. Like months ago, like in November, October, we had a discussion on this, and she sees Netflix's impact to be more deleterious. But I'd have to. It's been so long, I can't replicate her argument. But go ahead, Spoon.
I think it's a double-edged sword. So, like, as much as it does incentivize competition, and it does like put out some pretty decent content, like this streaming competition, the sort of like subscription economy that we're getting into now, I think is very dangerous, and like it's going to end up that we just have to subscribe to everything, and everything becomes like monthly payments, and the stuff that you get is not really the stuff you want. You just get what you get. Um,
It
and
becomes
it, like,
super cable.
yeah, exactly right. It just becomes cable at that point, and you just end up paying for just like multiple different services, and they can all fuck you over and all change it around instead of like having like one service that you pay for. You're paying for like 8 different services you have to manage, and like each do their own different thing. I think maybe it would be better if you could just buy the things you wanted, right? If you want to watch like the Mandalorian, right? You just buy the episodes of the Mandalorian, you watch that, and it's cheap, and everybody's gonna watch it because it's good. And like
Well,
Disney promotes it.
So
I
Well,
would
that's
be
the whole
okay
point
with
is the
something like
subscription
that.
trap.
but yeah,
That's the whole point of this.
That's what I mean, right?
don't
You can
know if it's
avoid the
even a
subscription
trap,
trap.
though.
Like,
I kind
if
of
they
reject
offered
that.
if they offered that option, I know for a fact, like what Sneaky Debate Man just said, I would take it, right? If I could buy the individual episodes at my leisure, I wouldn't have to worry about like, oh shit, I forgot about Hulu. Now my bank account is completely fucked for like 2 weeks because like overcharges are a pain in the ass, right? Like I could do that. $2 or $5 for an episode of The Mandalorian, I'd pay that. And I'd be able to pay it on my leisure. So if I want to hold it back, like I can't watch that episode until I
Yeah.
can pay for it.
So
If they
I still
offered
have
that
to watch The
option in
Mandalorian.
So
the
maybe that's the next evolution of these streaming platforms, because I
I
know you
hope
can
so.
go and
Maybe,
you can
yeah.
you can rent certain videos from Amazon Prime as an individual video. Granted, it's not as cost beneficial as getting a service or buying it outright. But I think as people start to see their numbers and their charts go, and they go and talk to their shareholders and be like, well, we lost 500 subs this week and we gained 200 this week. I'm pretty sure the market's going to be able to optimize their delivery in order to increase their profit.
I disagree.
Yeah.
So I disagree that I think maybe some services might do that, but there's all the services are not created equal. This is what I keep trying to say, because like Paramount Plus, just let it
Trash.
die, right? Just let it die.
Trash.
It's just not good. Like they have the Star Trek shows, and then that's it.
That's an
But the
example
point
of
is-
a company banking on one property.
Exactly.
also
All you wanted
remember-
to watch it was The Boys. Like, you just wanted to watch The Boys on Amazon, and like if you could just like rent that, that probably would have been
Yeah,
better.
but
Well, that's why
I'm-
Amazon
Yeah, so but that's what I'm saying, that
do
like
deliveries.
it depends on what service. Like Netflix and Disney Plus are on a different strata, than the others, right?
Level.
Yeah, right. Like they're a complete different strata. So like, why would they like give you an out for their quote unquote subscription trap? They wouldn't want to do that, right? For
All
other
the
services,
competitors-
for other
I know they
services,
wouldn't want to do that. I'm saying offering that as an alternative would be consumer friendly. I know they don't want to do that. I would just like that.
I'm saying, hold on. I'm just saying that like for other shows, for other services, like that are having trouble competing, like again Paramount Plus, like then paying specifically for a show might be a better idea. I'm just like thinking like PlayStation. PlayStation does not allow crossplay, right? For most of its games, it doesn't allow crossplay because they're the market leader, and they don't have to. They say "fuck you," right? Xbox allows it. Nintendo Switch is allowing it, as far as I understand it, right? They're doing crossplay together, but because they're trailing, well, the Switch doesn't actually compete the same way the other ones do, but you understand what I mean, right? But PlayStation is a clear market leader, so like, no, fuck you all. You're gonna play on our console, so, like your friends have to come on this platform to play, right? And if they're not, fuck them, right? Like you know where the GameStop is.
I think Disney could
When did we
offer this
get on-
option, like if like all of their like lesser competitors, like the Paramount Pluses and the CBSs and shit, like they all offer this option, and like Disney sees like, oh, like they're actually making some revenue. They don't get, like, Disney wouldn't get a loss by offering this. If they like offer and be like, yo, you could do the subscriptions
They already
and
do.
or buy the episodes,
Disney already
like
does.
you. Yeah, exactly right. Like
It's
you
not
could
on
just
Disney Plus, but you could buy all
Like,
of their
so-
properties individually.
yeah, like
if you
like
want.
you
So if I
you,
wanna
you can
buy
do that, and
physical.
it'll like the only effect it'll really have is like it'll get the people who already say like, you know what, I would buy it, but I'm not going to because I don't want to pay like the Disney Prime Plus. Like I just want to watch one movie, and then like I
Exactly
see
right.
the movie on sale for like $5.99 from YouTube or some shit, but like through Disney, like, or if Disney did it themselves on their website, yeah, like they would scoop in people. I don't know if they'd necessarily lose something with that.
I think like
So-
only
and like
big
the thing is
properties
as well, if you put out like lots of good content, right, and let's say it's like, I don't know, like $10 to buy like an entire season of something that everybody's watching, right? So you want to watch it, it's $10, right? And the subscription is, let's say, I don't know, $15 a month, right? You're gonna go, yeah, I'll buy this. I'll buy the $10 things because I only want to watch this one thing. And then they put out something else, right? And then you go, oh shit, I should have subscribed because now I'm paying $20 instead of $15. And I'm going to subscribe now, right? I think that's a great option, right? Because if there is just one thing that you want to watch, you could just watch the one thing. If it is more than one thing you want to watch, probably best
Like
that
a
you
little
subscribe.
test trial.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense to offer that option. I think it's consumer friendly, and I don't think it necessarily harms the business.
Netflix microtransactions. Are you listening, Netflix? Okay, come on. You can make a lot of money off this.
So
Fucking
let me just
for content.
So
let me
there's
just
another
watch
fucking
the
God.
one. Let me just watch the one good series you have on like every year, and that'll be great. Like I'll pay for that. Like the
Yeah,
other
exactly.
shit, keep it.
Exactly, and it incentivizes them to put out like multiple quality shows at once to get you to subscribe because it's cheaper, which means that there's more better content.
I just want more content. I just want
think more
content.
better.
I think there's
is-
an angle where y'all are missing. So you know, like Office got pulled from Netflix, right? And Office was one of the biggest Netflix shows people watched. And you know, whatever streaming service that's on right now, that's probably one of their top videos or whatever. Some of these companies are going to fold their streaming service because it's either not working, they're not getting the right traction or whatever, but they're still going to be sitting on that IP. And that's where I think when it comes to business in the market, there's probably ways that they can sell series to Netflix or through Disney, but by doing that, they say it like, okay, we're only going to sell you single or allow your customers to buy single episodes. That way, they don't have to buy into your service, but they can at least stream it from your platform, and that could be kind of a business.
Well, they already do that. Like
Hmm.
Netflix already does that. Like when they acquire certain series, like when they first got The Office and shit,
what-
they
but
said
what-
like you can only watch certain seasons, right? When they get those long-standing series, they're like, cool,
But I'm
we'll
taking
give
it to
you
the
our
next level.
property.
I'm taking it to the next level. If you don't have a Netflix subscription, but you want to watch The Office, and that service doesn't want to do it, Netflix could sell that service or that series.
They
and you can
do.
buy
They
just that.
do this. You can buy it from YouTube, Vudu, Apple TV, Google Play Movies and TV, Amazon Prime.
No. He's saying from Netflix. From
Oh, if
That'll-
Netflix wants to do that, like that would be like if Netflix would want to
so
do
you
that,
can get
like
an a la carte option through your the one you prefer.
So
that
like
would
if you
all
prefer
depend. That would
Netflix
depend
over
on like
Disney.
how long the companies want their properties to do that.
Yeah, I mean
like,
that's the market dealing with what consumers want. They're in success at providing a streaming service and trying to optimize their bottom line.
okay.